Hello, hello, hello. Y'all ready to chat about some like open world optimization tricks? I didn't have that much time to prepare, but we're definitely going to be talking about some interesting stuff today. We might just go chatting about that first and then dive into some portfolio reviews. I think we should do portfolio reviews first. We should probably do that first. Let's do that, and then we'll talk about like open world optimization techniques. Just discussing some of the stuff that I've learned, and maybe looking at some examples from recent games. Let's have a look at the gameplay trailer from Crimson Desert, for example. Let's have a look at what that game is doing, what I have figured out. Yeah, let me switch on the camera first. Oh, I'm so tiny. Let me zoom in a little bit. There we go. That's better. Hello, Emissart. Hello, McVal. Hello, Bolushka. Boloshka? Hope you're doing well. Good to see you here. Tiny Tim? Yeah. It's like the expansion from Borderlands. Tiny Tina. It's Tiny Tim. Hello, Pixel. Good to see you here. Morning. I started off my morning with a long walk in the rain, which I don't mind too much, actually. Yeah, started off my morning that way, going for a walk with Nacho, then sending off like a bunch of invitations for the team challenge because we are ramping that up as well, and we are building out our mentor and judge team, and also we will be announcing the thematic soon. Might give you a sneak peek, okay? But shh, don't tell anyone from the rest of the community, right? But the winning thematic, the thematic with the most votes by a decent margin after breaking the tie that we had for like a couple of weeks, well, a week, let's say. Yeah, in the end, the thematic that ended up winning was Kingdom Below. So that is the next thematic for the team challenge, which is awesome. I'm looking forward to it. The winning theme is Nacho's snack pile. Hey, you can make that Nacho snack pile, Just give him like a little cave that he can wander into. But I'm curious, so the next thematic is the Kingdom Below. I am curious to see what people are going to do with that. Because here's the thing, right? One of the interesting things that we always get with the thematic or with the team challenges is people asking like, hey, or there's always a decent amount of people that ask, hey, I want to have something futuristic. But my idea is always, if you are creative enough, you can make anything into something sci-fi, The Kingdom Below can be like an underground laboratory, right? That can be sci-fi. You can make it work. It is up to you then in your team to convince the other people that it's a good idea, right? So yeah. Make it a Kingdom Above, subvert expectations. Well, here's the thing, right? Like the thematic is always an interesting one because we in the team, we never really want to restrict you too much, right? So if you say like, hey, look, I really wanted to do this. I know that the team was all aligned. They wanted to do X, but it's not really a Kingdom Below, but we can kind of like, I don't know, we can kind of push it into the thematic a little bit more. That's fine, At the end of the day, the thematic is there to kickstart some creative ideas within the team. And then if the team decides to like, hey, look, we know that's not 100% like Kingdom Below, but who cares, At the end of it all, the most important thing for these team challenges is always a good end result. And if that means that you deviate a little bit from the thematic with your team to get the best result that everyone is aligned with, then that's what you have to do, right? Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So we are gonna kick things off. The signups are gonna open in a week from now. So next week, signups will be opening. which I'm really excited for. And then we only have like 4 days until they close again. So yeah, it's going to be a busy week, making a bunch of social media posts about it, trying to get as much of a buzz around it as well. So in the coming week, if you see anything on your feed for the team challenges, feel free to share it, like it, share it with your friends, share it with your mom, share it with your dad. Get everyone involved, you know? Hello, Arvid. Good to see you. Hello, Pewdie. Hope you are both doing well. Tiny Tim isn't real. He can't hurt you. Rain isn't too bad if you got paved roads. That's true. Yeah, we do usually go for a walk in the forest, though. So, muddy, slippery. I nearly fell on my ass like a couple of times. But hey, that's the fun of it, you know? But yeah, what else has been going on? So we got team challenges underway. I am doing a lot of work on the course, so let me actually share like a sneak peek. It's been a while since we talked about this. We've made a bunch of improvements to the whole formula, and we are getting a bunch of lessons done now. So let me actually show some stuff here. What is a good one? I think I showed my lesson off already, but let's have a look. So let me make sure that I'm sharing the right thing, because that always goes wrong. So do this, and then we do this thing. There we go. Okay, so let's have a look. So I think you've already seen this, right? The way that we build up the courses is that we have different roadmaps. So we are now building out like all the individual roadmaps that we have on the website, right? One of the roadmaps is the core skills. So these are like the fundamental skills that you need to know as an artist going in, right? We are really working hard on this. Foliage actually is for the most part done, apart from like a couple of tweaks here and there. And then art fundamentals is going to be like the next big push, especially from my side, because I want to talk a lot about art fundamentals. But just to give you an idea, and keep in mind, like all the stuff that I'm sharing here is all work in progress, so keep that in mind as well. But I think one of the more recent ones is intro to asset optimization. There's still some stuff that we need to do, but I've added thumbnails to all the videos. I've done the images still need to be edited. We have a couple of edited things that I still need to hash out, but hopefully this is showcasing like the idea of what we want to do. Any idea on the pricing model yet? So currently the pricing model will just be like a new tier on on the website. That is basically it. So it's going to be subscription based. I am playing around with the idea, or I'm thinking about the idea that you could have like one, what is that? Like a lifetime subscription? Not a lifetime subscription, but like a one-time fee. That is still in the cards as well. No idea on the pricing yet though. There's still a lot of discussion that needs to be had on that specific thing. So yeah, more on that later. I think those are good choices, to be honest. Well, yeah, here's the thing, right? Like, you want to have a subscription basis because then people can like try it out without the burden of having to pay like a lot of money for it, right? I think that's definitely going to be there. And then for people that know that they want to do this and they know that they want to support us going in the future, like a one-time fee is probably going to go really good as well. But yeah. So yeah, you can see that we're working on like a bunch of stuff. So this is all the core skills. It goes from reference gathering all the way to doing your first little presentation in Unreal, right? So we're going for reference gathering, low poly modeling, high poly modeling, unwrapping, asset optimization, baking, texturing into Unreal, materials, and all that kind of stuff, right? So this is the core track. We've also had a bunch of lessons for foliage as well. So we go to like a very in-depth lesson of what foliage art is, and why it's important, how to understand plants and all that kind of stuff. This is the thing. We want to go niche, right? We want to go niche, and we want to really dive into all the nerdy stuff because we have really talented people coming onto the course. This is, for example, Dennis Welling. He has worked on like Diablo 4, right? Like helping us build this course, building all the foliage courses. He has done a bunch of fantastic stuff. So he's a nerd about foliage. And if you're going into this lesson, we want you to be a nerd about foliage too, right? So that's the idea. You can see that we have like a bunch of different courses talking about how to create your own scans, or how to, well, not scans, right? Because this is not photometric scanning. This is just like going out, taking pictures and then cleaning them up to create your own atlases, to then creating your own grass and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of content here. I just wanted to give like a little sneak peek of what is happening here. But yeah, more on that soon. Both myself and Sunny, keep in mind this is only 2 people that are doing it, right? With, of course, the help of like all our external like course instructors. So yeah, it is going to take a little bit of time, but we are still planning to hopefully onboard the first group of people this month. So we will be reaching out. Even though it's going to get very busy with the team challenges and doing this, so it might slip into next month, but we want to start onboarding people soon so that we can get feedback. But yeah, that's what we're building. And I think currently we have like a whole bunch of lessons. I think 27 in total. This is not showing the full list, but we have 27 in total at this point. Liddy is saying, hello, first of all. Hello, Liddy. Good to see you. The UV unwrap image, I always share this with people who have never worked with 3D because it's so hard to explain otherwise. Oh yeah. We have some interesting, I don't know if I did an update to that lesson yet. But we have the Christmas one, right? That's like a stereotypical one. We need to update the images here as well. But there was another image that Andrew actually shared where he took a piece of fruit and then peeled it to like showcase like UV unwrapping. I think that's also a good way to explaining it too. But yeah, so more on that to come soon. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them down below and then we can chat about it. Let me switch on back. Oh, let me also do this. Yeah. Hello, Rostam. What did I miss? We were just talking about the courses, like the upcoming courses. I wanted to give like a sneak peek of what is happening with those because it's been a while. But soon we will start ramping up the marketing and, well, the marketing, not necessarily marketing, but like we will open up the initial sign up and then be more open about where that's going to go. So yeah, keep that in mind. Timeline is still somewhere this month or next month that we'll start onboarding people. We'll probably start with like a small group of 10 people. Sit down with them like every week and ask them what they think can be improved, where things go wrong, and we'll tweak all of it going from there. That is the plan. So yeah, busy on that front. So yeah, we got team challenges, we got the courses. Of course, we got some workshops. I think the next workshop is coming up next Monday, if I can remember correctly. Yeah, so yeah, Justin Frazee is gonna be joining us to talk about hard surface modeling for environment artists. Really cool stuff there. And then I think at the end of the month, we have mental health for artists with Felix as well, which is cool. So we've got a cool lineup, working really hard on the courses, doing a bunch of cool stuff with the team challenges. So, God, it's busy. It's busy. Busy. Oh, yeah. And also, for people that are joining in late, the next thematic for the team challenge is was revealed in the beginning of the stream. So if you're curious, feel free to check that out. But we will make like more proper announcements soon, you know. We'll do like the big reveal, make sure that everyone knows and all that good stuff. But yeah. Let me also have a look at who we are going to be talking about today for the portfolio reviews. Can you read the foliage section now and try and out some speed tree with some quixel textures? You'll just have to wait a little bit more. We're nearly there, McVal. We're nearly there. If you want to test it out early, though, we can definitely talk about that. Okay. Who do we have today? Okay. Got Patrick and Hjalmar. Are they both from Sweden? Oh no, one's from Germany, one's from Sweden. So yeah, what we will be doing for today is we will be going into portfolio reviews in just a second. And then we will go into talking about environment art optimization techniques for open worlds, right? McFall came up with a good idea to talk about Crimson Desert because a lot of people were looking at it and they were like really impressed with how they're rendering and how they're dealing with like a massive open world and making sure that it like renders nicely, right? It was very ambitious. So I'm gonna be talking about like some optimization techniques that we as environment artists have control over, right? Or that affect us. Because there's a whole bunch of like technical stuff that goes into making that render at the performance that it's doing, right? I can't really speak to that too much because I started looking into what is it, NGG, and oh my god, there was like a whole bunch of like terminology that is basically optimizing like the way that things get rendered on the GPU or the CPU, right? And it's just like, okay, that is too far for me. I don't want to think about that. We will be talking about how you get control over your assets in the open world game. Rostam is saying about the Academy, what I've seen so far looks very promising. Keep it up. Hey, thank you, Rostam. Thank you. We will definitely do that. It has been a long road to get there. We've changed it multiple times. And yeah, I've invested like a bunch of time and money into it. So it is like the next big thing for us. So I'm excited, but I'm also a little bit scared about it too, to be honest. But hey, we'll see how it does, you know? Now I think it's up to us to make it the best that we can, right? And then, because I think people would benefit from having it. Now we just need to make sure that they want to use it, right? That's our job. So we will see. Another thing that I listened to this week was actually a very interesting interview from Lex Friedman and Jeff Kaplan. So he was the former, oh god, I don't know what his title was, like game design director, I think, for a lot of like the Blizzard games. He recently left to do like his own thing. And now he's like coming back up to like talk about like the new thing that he's building. I found out like a very interesting
There's
interview.
3 types of fun.
Let me share that with you all. Oh yeah, I saw it online. The pressure they put on him was so sad. Yeah, there's some stuff in there where there was at the end of the podcast. It's a long podcast. It's 5 hours and 10 minutes. I've listened to the whole thing, but there was a section where he said he was talking about Overwatch specifically, right? And the deadlines that were put on him for Overwatch, and he got apparently it's the former CFO, so the chief financial officer, basically told him like, hey, look, you need to hit these milestones. They're like financial milestones, talking about like a number that is not public, right? Because it got bleeped out as well. But he said like, hey, look, we need you to hit this number with like recurring revenue at like this number. If you don't hit that number, we are gonna fire 1,000 people, and the burden is gonna be on you. And I just listened to that. And, you know, like, there's a feeling. I have this feeling too. Everyone probably has this feeling where you can feel this. You can feel this happening in the games industry, but no one's giving you the direct implication or the direct, I don't know, the direct story of what happened, right? So that makes these things like more powerful. Whenever there is this sort of transparency going around it, and you get a peek behind the veil, right? Because look at all the shit that's happening in games recently, right? You make a really successful game called Battlefield 6, and then the result is that you and the rest of your team might get affected and get laid off, right? Same thing happened there as well, right? They wanted to have 100 million like recurring players or something like that, right? And then it's just like, wait, what the fuck are we talking about? Like that is crazy, those numbers, you know? Like, it doesn't work like that. And then if you don't hit those numbers, which is like impossible to hit anyway, then I bet you that the same thing happened here, or my assumption would be that the same thing happened here, that upper management was just like, hey, look, these are the targets. The team works their ass off to get to that target. And then it's just like, well, you didn't hit it. It's almost always the upper management that screw good people, sadly. It's not necessarily upper management. I think it's the people that only care about the business side of things, not realizing that this is a creative industry. Because you have people in upper management who are fighting the good fight and they're trying to do their best, right? But I think it's more the people that just, they don't really care about the games, right? They just care about like the numbers and the return that those numbers can make over a period of time, right? I think that's where it goes wrong. Because you can have business-minded people that still care about the craft of the game and like trying to make it a better game, right? That can still happen. Look at I think a good example of this is like the CEO of Embark, right? What was his name? Was that blah 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 Strauss? Let me just no, that was someone else. So Patrick Sutherland. Like if you listen to him talk, like he's the CEO of Embark Studios, right? But if you listen to him talk, like he cares about games, right? Yeah, Sutherland. You're right, Mikhail. I was thinking about someone else. I suck at names, so it's good to look this up. But yeah, if you listen to like interviews with him, he cares about games. Sure, he has his business hat on, but you can tell that he cares about games and he thinks about the technology and what it can bring to the players rather than to the numbers, you know? And I think over time, what you see is with the bigger companies, like they have such a successful streak, like Blizzard Games, for example, that at a certain point, like it just gets co-opted by like people that only think about the business, which is just fucking crazy. And it's also crazy to think that these people that were there in the beginning of the games industry, they really made Blizzard what it is, right? To then be ousted by a company, or like not ousted, I don't want to speak for him, but like to then put you in a position where you have to make those like really crazy decisions about a company that you've worked for like multiple decades, to then be like, hey, look, like this is not the thing that I want to be doing anymore. That is just freaking mental. You get put in that position. And it is interesting because now with that context, there was actually a talk at GDC. Because I only listened to like a little bit of it. But there was a talk that I landed on yesterday at GDC from and the title caught my eye, right? Because it's called An Odyssey in Building Games at Last. So I was like, hey, look, I want to listen to that. And it was from, let me get his name right. It was from Rob Pardo. So he spent most of his career on games like StarCraft, World of Warcraft, and all that kind of stuff, right? Like all these iconic games. And then at the end of it, and this was really interesting, at the end of it, he says, I let me see. I don't want to paraphrase him. So let me see if I can bring it up. And we're gonna listen to it. Let me see.
To create a game that truly endures, it's really incredibly difficult. And if you're fortunate enough to launch one of those games, the rewards can be extraordinary. But in my experience, if you build a game like that, it also means that you've built an incredible development team. And personally, I think the game team is more valuable than the game itself. So treasure that team, nurture that team, give them the autonomy to keep taking care of the players. Because the thing that made the game special in the first place was the people who built it. So thank you all, and have a great day.
Right. And that sentence really stuck out to me. It's about the developers behind it, the team, right? This is usually what we hear when... How should I even say this? This is usually what we hear on the back end when something internally causes so much friction, but you can't really speak openly about it. That's what I feel, right? Maybe I'm projecting a little bit. But if I then hear the story of Jeff Kaplan and like all the stories at Blizzard, I can tell that there's a lot of pressure on this person as well. And maybe he feels the same sort of frustration, right? But he can't like openly talk about it because obviously he's still at the company. And usually this is what you would hear, right? It's like, oh, we need to like really foster the teams and like really think about the teams. And sometimes I think about like the immense pressure that needs to be on that person to be able to say that in that way while trying to keep it like PR, right? Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know. Makes me reflect on like a lot of things happening in the games industry, honestly. Because it is intense. It is intense, and I think, yeah, it is crazy that it puts like people under so much pressure. Sorry, I'll get on my soapbox now, but I think it was like very interesting to listen to those two things. Like I listened to them like almost in sequence, where like I heard about like all the stories of Jeff Kaplan, and then I listened to like the end of this keynote speech, like the opening speech of like GDC, and there was the same sort of. It was an undertone in one person, and then it was blatantly stated in like Jeff's interview. But it's interesting that the same undercurrent, like underpinned both of those talks, I found. Yeah. Interesting. Right. Okay. Let's switch it up. Let's have a look at some actual portfolio reviews. And let's talk about some open world optimization tips next. Shall we do that? Let's switch it on over then. Let me see. Is this the right one? There we go. That is the right one. I just need to do this one thing. There we go. Okay. Let's go. So, let's have a look. So, first person up here is Hjalmar Berg. So, there are lots of studios I find interesting, but Machine Games, CD Projekt, and Hazelight are goals for me. Okay, cool. So, in that list, Machine Games and CD Projekt are like very mature. Mature in their audience and in the games that they make, right? And then Hazelight is more about like stylistic fun, if I were to say it, right? So I'm already seeing a split between, okay, either you need to go like really realistic with your art style, or you go more stylized and saturated with your colors and all that kind of stuff to aim for something like Hazelight, right? So there's already like a split there. Cool. So let's see. If you want to get your portfolio reviewed just before we get into it, feel free to sign up to our community. Every week I do portfolio reviews, I do weekly work reviews. So if you want to take part in all of those things, feel free to sign up. Right, so Hjalmar, let's have a look. A 3D environment artist who enjoys utilizing props, lighting, and materials to create lived-in spaces that can tell a story. I love to explore and find new efficient ways to level up my artistic skills. Cool. currently working on portfolio at your, oh my god, Volkshochschule. That is so difficult. I cannot pronounce that. But it's like the People's High School, right? In Yo, I'm imagining. Interesting. Okay, so let's go to the About page. Interestingly enough, like you can't upload your CV if you don't have a pro account, which is kind of dumb. So we need to change that. We need to change that a little bit. Oh, thanks, McVal. That is super helpful. But let's have a look at your LinkedIn. Cool. Everything here is looking nice. You have an environment art internship that you're doing at the moment. Oh no, not at the moment. 2 years ago. Jesus, time flies. Cool. You've done 2 internships, which is good. Yeah, I would make use of your banner, right? Update your banner, make it something striking, make it like immediately you, right? Like if you put this on your work as a banner, I think that could be really nice, right? So I would use every bit of real estate that you have, right? Like on your screen to like attract people. Let's see. Cool. So that's pretty good. Yeah, make most of your space. This brings up an interesting thing. Like, where would you put your CV then? I would probably then put it on your LinkedIn somewhere. Because I know that you can do like your featured area, and then maybe you can put your CV here instead of on your ArtStation, right? If that is gonna be helpful. Because I still want to be able to get your CV from somewhere, right? That if I'm interested, I can download your CV and I can save it on my hard drive and then share it with the rest of the team, right? That's what I still want to do. And if we can't do that through ArtStation, then we just need to do that through LinkedIn, right? So that's probably going to be the way that we'll have to do it from this point on. But yeah, let's have a look. I think first impressions are really good, right? Like all these thumbnails look really nice. What I would say though is, and this is a tiny pet peeve of mine, Unreal Engine, I don't care about that logo because you can usually tell, right? So I would probably do something different with the thumbnail because you are like cutting out like, I don't know, 15% of the thumbnail with just like a logo that doesn't really add too much to it. But yeah, that has always been my opinion. I don't think the logo needs to be on here, and just make it more interesting. Make the thumbnail more interesting to look at. I think what we could do with the thumbnails is make them a little bit more impressive, as in can we increase the intensity of the thumbnail? And what I mean by that is if let's say we take our little thumbnail here, and then it's pixelated, but we don't care about it. But if we then say we are gonna increase the contrast and maybe play around with like the light a little bit as well. So if we rasterize this, because I'm trying to get more focus on the thing that matters, right? And I might start accentuating just like the light that's coming in. And then maybe even doing a vignette or something like that too. Just so that we have like a little bit more contrast, a little bit more interest going into the image. So if we do an inner shadow instead. Oh, that's not what I want. I don't want to have that at all. Let's actually do. Okay, this is gonna be slightly messy. I mean, you get the point, probably, right? Just do like a little bit of a touch up to like your thumbnails. So we can have something like this, and then we throw a let me see, a blur on it. We can make this like pretty subtle, but it helps just like increasing the focus on like the core of it, right? And if we then, yeah, that looks like a bit more inviting, like a bit more contrasty too, right? You can usually tell if it's Unreal. Oof. Well, yeah, I mean, it's supposed to be, right? If you are that good. Okay, let's honestly talk about this, right? Because if your work is that good that it's indistinguishable from something else, then maybe I could make the argument that you can add the Unreal Engine logo to it, right? But I always find it a waste of space to have like a logo take up like 15% of your thumbnail, right? I'm always a fan of letting the work speak for itself and let the work pull you in, right? Because if I click on something and I like it for like its artistic values, and then you go into it and then you realize that it's Unreal, that is a pleasant surprise, right? Like you're setting people up to be surprised by it rather than, I don't know, like it spoils the surprise almost for me. Because yeah, this looks cool, right? Like this little thumbnail looks really nice, but I just don't like the Unreal Engine logo on it. Yeah, Charlie, we were just talking about that. I am never a fan of Unreal Engine logos. I think it's fine. I just find it interesting how apparent the Unreal Engine look has become. Yeah. I thought Unreal Engine had an ArtStation had a built-in thumbnail feature. No. Artists are manually doing it. Yeah. I like the Unreal Engine 5 logo. Yeah, I mean, I like the logo. It just doesn't deserve to be on your thumbnail, right? That's the thing. If you are doing something that is so mind-blowing that you can't imagine it being in Unreal, then I can potentially see you adding the thumbnail, the logo on the thumbnail, but then you have to realize why we're doing it, right? Because then what you're trying to say is like, this is so crazy that you don't expect it to be Unreal, but it is, right? Because for the most part, like I can look at this and I know that it's all Unreal anyway. Anyway, that's usually my thought process on it, right? Like if you have this tiny piece of space, like use it for the art, not for the logo. Like the fact that it's Unreal, it won't cause them to click on it. They'll click on it because it's cool. I think these days it's the assumption that it's Unreal too. Yeah. Like I will disregard that like logo in the thumbnail anyway, so it might as well not be here, right? That's probably a better way of saying it. I think it's fine. I just find it interesting that there is an Unreal Engine look that you can get away from, right? You can do some like really cool stuff in Unreal, but honestly, the majority of students shouldn't be diving that deep into the engine anyway to do that, because it's honestly just a little bit of a waste of time. But I'm putting that expectation on studios, right? Like if you want to set your scene or your game apart, how do you do that? By still using the engine, right? Because there's some really interesting looking like Unreal Engine games out there. But yeah. I feel like it tells people straight away that it's a personal project rather than professional. That too, to a certain degree. Yeah, that is true as well. I don't necessarily mind that too much, you know? If that was like the perception of people, I don't necessarily mind it that much, but yeah. I think the value for me is that the Unreal Engine 5 logo lets me know that it's real-time 3D environment, not a photo, not a Blender project, etc. Well, here's the thing, I can tell. Like, for the most part, if you put something in front of me, like, a professional can tell if it's Unreal or not, right? Or if we broaden it up, like, if it's real-time or not. Because usually you can already tell the difference between, like, a Blender Eevee render and an Unreal Engine one, for example. Right? Plus, usually, like, we'll do this now, right? So if we go in here, usually the first thing that I glance at is this little section here. Because if there's no Unreal Engine or no Game Engine stuff in there anyway, then I'm already out, right? But usually, I mean, from this introduction, like, I can tell, right? The camera movement, the way that everything is laid out, the rendering, this is Unreal. Again, not that that is a bad thing, right? But I don't think we need to sell the fact that it's Unreal in the thumbnail. That's just, yeah, my opinion on it. I think there could be cases where if a studio that is using Unreal is scrolling on ArtStation and see the cool screenshot with the Unreal Engine logo on it, it immediately pops off at a potential hire. No, because the potential of the hire comes from the cool stuff, not from the Unreal Engine logo. You know? Because again, like, you can definitely tell if something comes out of Unreal, right? Because also, if you look at the whole ArtStation, like, real-time environment art category, right? 90% of it is going to be Unreal. So the base assumption on ArtStation is Unreal, right? But yeah, let's continue having a look. So we are going to look at this Coastal Kitchen. This is the latest environment piece I've worked on and finished a little while ago. Cool. Unreal Engine 5.6. Let's see. It shows this wonderful concept by Alarico. Cool. Let's have a quick peek at the concept. Oh, yeah, I've seen this. Some people are working on this. I'm guessing it is that, right? Kind of looks like that. That is cool. Yeah, that's cool. I like this sort of stuff, you know, where it's like it's a crude kind of concept. It's meant to be crude in this way, right? But it's a crude kind of concept, and you'll have to do a lot of the thinking that comes on top of it, right? Okay, let's have a look. Textile density is 1K per meter, which is good. Around 10 weeks in total. Yeah, okay, that's good. 10 weeks in total. Pretty good timeline. Let's have a look. We're not going to be diving deep into like artistic feedback here, right? It's more about the presentation and the rendering and all that kind of stuff. I am not necessarily a fan of this render here because it breaks the illusion that it's actually bigger than it is, right? And this is showing that like it's lacking detail when it comes to this wall. Because if you think that like this person took so much care and like added so much stuff here, then you kind of would expect like some shelves or something like that on this wall too, right? But I love these little details, right? Like it's story, it's interesting, it gives me something to look at. If you want to refine your cinematics, I would definitely cut out like the start and stop stuff, right? Where, especially at the later ends, like whenever you see this, right, you cut it out and then it's like, oh, we need to get going again, guys. And that happens in every shot, right? I would try to cut those things out and keep it a little bit smoother, keep us moving along. Yeah, that screenshot shows just how small the scene is. Yeah, and I don't mind that it shows how small the scene is necessarily. My concern is mostly about like how empty the rest is. because you can definitely tell like this is a concept and you've recreated that in like a good manner. But then the rest of it is like, wait, what do you do with that space, right? You could actually flip that on its head and say, hey, look, this is a concept, right? I don't know what I'm going to be doing with the rest of the space, but I'm going to fill it in creatively, right? And that's where this could actually turn into a flaw into an opportunity, right? Because if this is actually like a pretty realistic scenario where a concept artist or a director says like, hey, this is what we want, but we need to have the room in like 360, right? Because you're going to be going into the room and like you need to interpret the concept and then distill some of the core functionality and the features to then dress up the rest of the room, right? That's why I like this concept, because it's not giving you everything and you can still fill in some of the gaps. For example, if you extend this wall, what does that wall look like, right? But yeah. Cool. So that would be like an opportunity that you can still work on if you wanted to, right? Maybe a photo frame on the wall. I would put like a couple of shelves, memorabilia. I would have like another small dresser here with some like additional stuff. Maybe there's, I don't know, broken down washing machine. You know, like you can do anything, but it's just the space needs to be filled in a little bit more. I can't tell the difference between a Marmoset and Unreal Engine 5 render. I must be blind. Fair, and that's nothing to worry about. Like honestly, in the beginning, that's really hard to do, right? To tell the differences. And especially when you go into like more niche examples, that is really difficult. But for example, well, it depends on the project as well. But usually, Marmoset's render quality is higher in detail because it has like crisper shadows. It also has more detailed like ray trace reflections and all that kind of stuff happening, right? Where in Unreal you can do the same things too, but it usually takes you longer to get to that point. Those works are on Pinterest. The artist is good. Yeah, I like what the artist is doing. Okay, so we got a breakdown here. Looking nice, looking nice. A good overview. It's nice and clean. It's a gym. Okay, so here we get into like the juicy stuff, right? There's a couple of things that I already want to point out. We're going to be pointing out some stuff here. So first of all, I like the way that you optimize your UVs, right? UVs look really tightly packed. I like that a lot. That's looking really good. The immediate thing that I jump to is all this wasted geometry, right? Because none of these loops, they contribute to like the silhouette. So that's me questioning like, okay, why is that there? Sometimes vertex paint can be a good excuse, right? But I don't think vertex paint is used here, if I'm not mistaken. So that's like a little flag that I want to throw up. It's nothing too major because the rest of the assets actually look like pretty well done. I will say in terms of presentation, it is hard to read, right? Especially if we look at something like this. The geometry here gets so dense that I can't read the wireframe. So that constitutes like either we blow this up, we make it bigger, right? So that we can actually see the wireframe, or we pull it out to like an individual showcase, right? Instead of trying to showcase like all of this stuff on one page, maybe giving us like more upfront and like up close renders. Changing the wireframe color might also help, right? Because this is like the default color, and honestly, the default color, God, it's horrendous in Unreal. You know, it works in Unreal, but if you want to do a presentation, that is not what you want to see necessarily. But yeah, 1K texture set, base color normal, metalness, roughness, and AO. Right. That is good. Yeah. No, not that person. Yeah, so see, in this case, it looks way clearer, right? And I can read where everything is kind of stacked and like how it's used and all that stuff. So that's good. 2K. Very nice. 4K. Interesting. Anisotropy angle and anisotropy level. That seems to be very niche, why you would have like a dedicated like texture for that. So this is making me question like, okay, if you're using these maps, right? There might be a good reason for it, but like showcase why you did use these on this asset and not on the other ones and how it makes a visual difference, right? Because that could be a really nice showcase of like, hey, I thought this needed like a little bit of extra detail, or it might be too much, right? Because also like this use case, right? I don't know. It feel like it's not going to warrant the extra detail that you get from like anisotropy, right? Like that brushed kind of metal feel. So yeah, 4K for that feels overkill. I was thinking the same, but I was thinking this is all unique, right? Is there like any symmetry on this guy? That might also be like interesting to highlight, right? Whenever you use like symmetry or any sort of like optimization techniques, that might be good to showcase. What I'm not seeing here is the backside of this fridge, which makes me think that you didn't make it, potentially. Yeah, presentation is good. I like the presentation. I think this is nice. I would always love to see this in context, right? Is this for real time? I feel like some of the topology feels way too dense. No, I don't really mind the topology. Oh, but you actually bring up a good point. I would love to see the amount of polys that is being used in total here, right? Like a poly count. That was actually a good point. Because that is the thing that we're missing. Like we are seeing like texture set information and all that kind of stuff, but I am missing a poly count. There's also, again, like the opportunity to optimize like some of the surfaces that are not contributing to the silhouette here, right? Especially these like bigger interior surfaces. They don't need that much geo. But yeah, overall, like I don't mind this amount of geometry, right? We are going for like a very close-up look of everything, so you kind of want to give it like a little bit extra, but this is definitely not overkill though. Cool. So yeah, I was saying having this stuff in context where you showcase these tiles and then you showcase them onto like the scene here or something like that, right, in the back. So that I always try to put an emphasis on how contextual the materials are in the scene, right? Hello, Sayad. Welcome, welcome. I like the arrangement of plates. Papu was saying, yeah. I like it has like a nice realistic feel. Let's see. And then this is with or without decals. You barely see anything change. You can definitely use way more decals here if you wanted to. Because there's barely any change in the entire scene, right? Some of the references and planning. I like that you had a timeline from the start. I think that's always good. Got a project schedule as well. Yeah, okay. So I think overall this presentation is really, really well done. We are missing the poly count, right? That was like one of the smaller things that I wanted to bring up. Sometimes it's hard to read the wireframe of things. Now looking at this again, sure, you could potentially like optimize like some of these, right? We already talked about the pot maybe some of the plates as well. It depends on the amount of polys that we have. But yeah, overall, I really like the look, the attention to detail. It's pretty good. The thing that I do want to see more is just this, right? Like this is there's a lot of opportunities that are missed here. Like more decals, more storytelling, like really showcasing that like you can take a concept and like extrapolate on that concept. That would be really cool to see. But yeah, this feels, I mean, in terms of like the environment itself, it feels like really nicely done. It feels very appropriate to be like game art as well. And it feels very optimized at this point. So yeah, good stuff. Let's have a look at some of the other stuff. So you have your material work here. Some materials that I made roughly in the last year. Okay. Oh, nice. Sculpting in ZBrush as well. That is good. It is interesting. I like the way that this reads. But then this feels like super saturated all of a sudden. So I don't know, it's just the presentation of it. Because yeah, I think presentation is good, right? Sometimes I'm missing some bit of a context. Like whenever I give the recommendation to people to build a material, show me the context, show me how it's used in a production, right? So for example, these stone bricks have like a piece of wall in like an ancient Roman city or something like that, and have like a piece of pavement that's from Megascans, and then showcase how you then integrate that into the environment, right? That honestly doesn't take too much longer than the work you're doing here already, but it will elevate the presentation and just, it will showcase to potential employers that they can also, it's not only about like making a material sphere, it's about how this is used in the environment, right? That is so important. Yeah, execution wise, this looks good though. I like it. But yeah, context in presentation always helps. It always helps a lot. Some props I got the honor of making Add Pieces interactive. Okay. It's 2 years ago. Right, see, this is good, right? We got a poly count. I'm missing the wireframe, but at least we got a poly count for everything. And that is really good, right? $4K for something like this is good. Does some sculpting. It does get a little bit busy with this presentation. But again, this might also be because that is what you had to do for professional work, right? So you're kind of limited more in professional work than in personal work. But yeah. Let's continue on. 2 years ago. Okay, interesting. Immediate thing is you've grown a lot since this piece that you did like 2 years ago compared to the last piece, right? The lighting is way more purposeful. There is like a bit more storytelling going on. And it feels like this is just like, I like the stuff that I did here, but I don't know how or why I should showcase it, right? That's kind of how this feels. Whereas the other environment feels very purposeful in the way that you approach the rendering of it. Especially if we compare the two, right? So it's very purposeful. You're telling a story. There is something happening. We get like a feel of the character behind the scenes, you know? Where with the other one, it is somewhat hard to tell. You know, sure, there is a story, but it feels like the lighting and the way that the composition works is not really focusing me towards like the points that you want me to be looking at, right? The Wizard of Oz. Okay. Composition blockouts. Right. So I like the presentation. I think the presentation is decent, but it definitely you know that you need to present it better in your last piece, right? So you can definitely see again the growth, and it makes me question, because here's how I look at this, right? In terms of the skill set that is shown between this environment and the newer environment, there's a lot of overlap, right? So that makes me think that if this is literally just an iterative piece where you go from like, hey, I make a small interior scene to, hey, I make another small interior scene that is way more interesting and way more detailed, then the question to me becomes, okay, when is the time that we remove this, because it's not necessarily showing you in the best light again, right? And that's always a question that you have to ask yourself, right? Like if you make something that is similar in terms of the skills and the style and all the components of the individual elements of the scene, then if you just continue, if you make a new piece with those same sort of things in mind, then that's just an iteration, right? So what I also would say about this is, if that is your wheelhouse at this point, right? So if we go to your portfolio, the last thing is also, I mean, this is sort of like an exterior kind of scene. Is it exterior? Kind of feels like both. Let's see, 2-week game engine course in Unreal Engine 5. Yeah, this, because again, it's trying to showcase like the same sort of skills, right? This constitutes for being removed, right? Because the ACs, they don't seem to function, like they're just like little boxes on the wall. You can definitely showcase, you can definitely see the growth that you've done in like the last couple of years. So be very specific what you put on your portfolio, because if I click on this, this looks decent. I think this is nice to look at, right? Like you really put some thought into it. And then if we go to something like this is just like, it's a corner that is supposed to be like an asset presentation, but the assets are not good enough to present by themselves, right? So yeah, that is something that you need to think about, right? If this is not what you want employers to see, it's time to remove it. What I was gonna say, from like a high level, right? If you think about what you put on your portfolio, right? Try to always distill the things that you make into its core elements, right? So for example, this is an interior scene with a couple of assets, and then you're also showcasing like a couple of titleables and all that kind of stuff here, right? But at the core of it, it's an interior scene that is pretty modern in its approach, right? So let's go with those like very broad categories. Then this is kind of the same thing, right? Like relatively modern interior scene. And then this is also somewhat an interior scene, but I think it's also exterior, so this is a bit more confused. But you can see that all the things that you're adding to your portfolio is just the same, but better, right? So definitely remove this one. That is definitely not supposed to be on your portfolio, especially with this one here. When it comes to the homely study, I think that's okay-ish to keep for now. But what I want to see for the future is I want to see you diversify a little bit more. I want to see you try something different, right? An exterior scene, or a blend between an exterior and an interior, or I don't know, something maybe not sci-fi, but like something more historical in nature, or something that really flexes like another skill that you have, right? For example, an exterior scene, that means that you're going to have to make foliage, right? And that makes you more diversified and more interesting to hire as an artist, because you can do a little bit more of a variation in your skills, right? That's what I would say. Like, try to think about your things on your portfolio as, okay, what skill or what thing can I add to make myself more hireable for companies out there? So do the same thing that you're doing here, right? Like with a scene, usually you cannot focus as much on materials that you're doing with this one, right? So that is showcasing, hey, just materials by itself, this is what I can do, right? But try to do that with other things as well. Magma is saying, I think that the interior scene looks good, but this diorama is a bit meh. Yeah, I think so too. And that's the thing with like old work, right? You learn so much in 3 years that at a certain point, you just have to be like, hey, look, this isn't good enough anymore. Especially because you created this in 2 weeks. Maybe you're trying to use those 2 weeks as like, hey, look, this was like a short turnaround and this is what I came up with. That never looks good, honestly. Like if the immediate impression is like, ooh, this looks a bit rough, it doesn't matter if you spend 2 weeks on it or not, you know? It shouldn't be on your portfolio then. Yeah, I'd be proud, honestly. Yeah. I mean, look, like if you dedicate yourself to your craft and you spend like a regular amount of time like each week to like keep boosting up your skills, this is the expected result of that, right? Like it is really cool to see, but it doesn't belong on your portfolio. That's the main thing, right? That's where sometimes we get confused between, oh, some people want to see like a journey and then some people want to see your portfolio. I'm firmly in the camp of only showcasing your best work because a studio doesn't really want to see your journey, right? Like maybe as an individual artist, I am curious about your journey, right? So let me split this up, right? So if I am in a hiring position and I look at your work, I as an individual might be interesting to know where you come from and what your work is, and I would love to hear more out of your personal story, right? But a company doesn't care. A company just cares about like, hey, this is a set of things that we need to get filled and done on the project. Are you going to be the best fit for that position, right? And if you showcase this old work, this is to your detriment for those chances, right? Straight up. And everyone has this, right? A very normal part of the progression as your artistic skills grow. But that's just how companies look at it, right? Ashish is asking, well, first of all, hello, a little late to the party. Party! Yeah, we're gonna be no party here, Magma. Oh, thanks. We're just geeking out over art. It's true though. It's true. I'm very serious all the time, you know. But we are actually going to be looking at some open world optimization techniques, which also that doesn't sound like a party, but it's a party to me. Well, hey. But your question is, does it matter how long it takes to create the project? Well, so the only thing that matters really is how good it looks. And then, sure, maybe if you can do it in a reasonable timeline, sure, maybe we'll look at that too. But to me, what is always most important is how good something looks, right? How do you apply your artistic skill on your work? That's all I care about. Because your portfolio can be filled with like environments that take you 2 weeks, right? But if they all look like shit, then it doesn't matter. Right? But if you have one portfolio piece or like 2 portfolio pieces that look like really, really well done, but you also did spend a couple of months on each, that's what I want to see, right? I would rather see option 2 rather than option 1. Serious business here. I just love nerding out about this stuff. But yeah, that's also a good reminder for if you are in the chat and you want to ask any questions about like whatever is coming up during my talks, feel free to ask any questions, right? This is your time to shine. So if you want to get into the industry and you have any questions at all, feel free to ask them. Cool. Going back to Hjalmar then. Where do we land? We had a look at all the work. Let me go back to the dashboards. So we don't have a CV. I still need to change this up. So we're going to be changing the scoring for that a little bit as well. I do like what I see though. I do like what I see in terms of you call yourself a 3D environment artist. It shows that you want to create, like the thing that you say here, right? I want to create lived in spaces that can tell a story. I can tell. I can tell, right? So that is good. Your vision is aligned with the work that you're putting on the table, right? That is good. I like to see that. But yeah, let's see. So in terms of like hireability, I think the work is good, but there's still some stuff that I want to see. As in, yeah, we talked about this render, for example, right? Where this is a golden opportunity to showcase that you can also think outside the box and do more than the concept tells you to, right? You tried adding a little bit of stuff with like the table to the left, right? And I think this is going the right direction. But like really try to imagine what are the people living here? Like what is happening here? And like how do you then put your own story and your own craft on the table, right? I think that's a golden opportunity this shot, honestly. And that's what I want to see, right? Because you can replicate a concept, but what do you think as an artist? Like how do you improve upon that concept, right? So let's see if hireability. Currently, it's very niche, right? It's very niche. It feels very much prop focused. And I think when it comes to the individual quality of those props, if this is the thing that you focus on, I want to see more, right? So either you go and you focus on the big picture, right? Either you focus on the big picture, which means that you open yourself up to doing more than just interior spaces, right? You should be more ambitious then and showcase like, hey, look, if I like creating lived-in spaces, then I want to see that ambition and I want to see you focus more on the bigger picture, right? Because if you're focusing on, let's say, this, I would say like a small scale of a scene, right? Which is good in terms of like production pipeline, right? Like the timeline to get to a finished result on a scene like this is good. But that means that the needle shifts more towards like being wowed by the scale and the ambition of the project to the attention to detail in all the small things. So that means extra attention to detail on the texturing, extra attention to detail on all the small things when it comes to storytelling, more decals, like really paying attention to like all these like little cupboards and straight edges and like really trying to break it up and make it feel like it's 100% lived in, right? Basically what I'm saying is that you pick your own battles, right? So if you go more open worldy, that means that you have the benefit of focusing more on a macro perspective, and the smaller your scene becomes, you need to focus more on a micro perspective. Cool. So let's see. Presentation overall is pretty good though. I like the presentation. You've done a good job of breaking down your techniques and all that kind of stuff. The poly count was missing, but I like the presentation of the last scene. Obviously, when we go back to earlier scenes, it kind of becomes like a little bit lacking, right? Like this sort of presentation, it is okay, but this is literally like low-hanging fruit, so I want to see more. So again, the older work that still remains on your portfolio is kind of dragging down the average here, right? So I would say a 5 for technique, and then let's say artistry 6. Yeah. So my things that stood out, like solid asset work, a good understanding on how to make story-filled scenes, but I want to see more ambition. Yeah, more ambition and creativity coming from you, right? So this is more as in, okay, you have the scene, you have the concept, like how do you fill out the rest of it, right? That is your artistic voice, like an opportunity to shine it out. I know that I'm hammering this point into the ground, but I think that is such a golden opportunity, right? So yeah, I want to see more ambition and creativity from you, especially focusing that can add value to your portfolio. Which are not already showcased, right? So the skills that are not showcased is like a good use of trim sheets, right? Like a heavy focus on how you use your vertex painting and your decals all together. How do you, because I know that you have some stuff in here, right? Where you showcase like your vertex painting. But how do you take that further, right? Like how would you take that to like a triple A level? Right, because even here, I could make the argument that like there's a weird split happening here. Well, I mean that's kind of beside the point, but yeah, I want to see proper blending between the border of the wall and the ground, right? Like a couple more decals here, and really go crazy with the decals, right? Because if we focus on this and you focus on a grand level, right? Like we zoom out and we take a step back, it is actually pretty hard to notice what changes, right? Sure, the lines of the wall get broken up, which is pretty cool. But the rest of it actually doesn't really change too much, right? So that could be like a golden opportunity to have more stuff done to like adding weathering and all that kind of stuff to the scene. Yeah. Cool. Does this make sense? So, but I want to see more ambition and creativity coming from you, especially focusing on skills that can add value to your portfolio, which are not already showcased. Example given, for example, trim sheets, exterior, something that's not on your portfolio yet and that I kind of want to see, right? Because yeah, I think the artistry is good. It just, I want to see that extra push, right? That extra push into like really looking at like different surfaces in the house and then trying to replicate it, right? Like really showcasing like specific breakup, showcasing cause and effect, right? Is also something that I look at a lot. It's for example stuff like this, right? There's a crack in the floor. Cool. How did that crack came to be, right? Like showcase me something. And then if this crack exists here, why does it also exist here, right? Sure, I know this is a tileable texture and all that kind of stuff, but those attention to details, like they really make a difference, right? Yeah. And yeah, try to get me a bit more involved in the story, right? Because you added something here, which is cool, but how does that relate to the rest of the scene, right? Like what is happening? I still want to get like a better introduction to the story there. Ashish is asking, will the lines of the wall get broken up in real life? A painter will try to paint straight lines, to be honest. Yes, but this does look like a very old apartment, right? So maybe I could make an argument for it not being that way. Yeah, even like maybe the breakup is like a little bit too strong, but hey. In terms of like all the rest that could happen to the scene, that's a small thing, I think. Cool. So let's go back. Let's finish this off and then let's talk about some questions in the chat. So yeah, let's keep it to this. Thank you, Halmar. I wanna double back to where we started, right? Machine Games, CD Projekt Red. Those are companies that have a high bar of people that want to get in, right? If you look at Machine Games, look at the way that they surface their levels, right? In terms of like texturing and all that kind of stuff. Look at the way that they detail their environments. If that is where you want to go, you need to get really close to that. right? So set yourself that ambition. Try to see where you want to go, because I know that I said, for example, I want to see more trim sheets, exterior spaces, all that kind of stuff, right? If you say like, hey, look, I want to focus on interior spaces, then that is fine. But that also means that I want to see interior spaces from you that can rival a AAA game, right? That is the bar that you set for yourself, which is doable. Which is doable because you have the benefit of not having to make a full game, but that means that attention to detail needs to be there, right? Like you're really nerding out about, hey, there's moisture that comes in through the window. What kind of an effect has that on the walls? Like maybe there's like water that's like seeping through the walls. How does that bubble up to the surface? You know, what kind of effect has that on the textural detail? Like that kind of stuff. That's what I want to see then, right? Like the really niche stuff that like no one else is really thinking about, you need to nerd out and really get crazy about. But yeah, you're on a good track, Helmar. Keep doing what you're doing. Focus on that attention to detail. And then, yeah, make sure to bring it to the next level. Give me a second. I'm just going to grab like a little bit to drink. And then we'll dive into some questions as well. Oh, maybe I should do this. I feel like the haze light also has a high bar for people since they hire so few people. Yeah, that is very true. That is very true. Very, very true as well. That's the thing, right? Like if you really want to have those, if you really want to get into those high quality bar companies, that means that the quality bar for your portfolio needs to be there as well. Like you need to basically showcase that you can do the work before you get the ability to do the work, right? But yeah, let's have a look at some questions, shall we? Let's see. Bear is asking an interesting question. Should I sell 3D AI generated assets to addicted 30-year-old kids on Roblox? Yes. So many other people are doing it. Why aren't you doing it, Fair? Don't you want to make money? Come on. Don't pretend like you have a soul now. Okay, on a more serious note, Tim, I've heard that you should tailor your portfolio towards a specific company style-wise. Isn't that extremely risky, though? What if you don't get hired? That's a good question. So, I've always leaned away from that specific advice because of that reason, right? Let's say, I mean, to be fair, what has changed in the industry in the last couple of years is that a lot of companies are doing very similar styles, right? In AAA especially. That works to our benefit too, right? But when I get scared, for example, is when this is like 5 years ago or something like that, right? When people said, "Hey, I want to dedicate my life to work for a company like Blizzard. I'm only gonna do hand painted stuff." Sure, sure, that might work, but it is so incredibly risky and so incredibly saturated already that you you can make it, right? But that means that you need to be the best of the best, right? That's what it comes down to, really. Like, the more niche you go in terms of like art style, the better you need to be at executing that art style to get hired by that company, right? So that's why my focus is not on the art style, because art style to a certain degree is somewhat transferable, right? I can look at your work and I can see that you have the underlying fundamentals. You know how to use color, you know how to use shapes, you know how to use leading lines, you know composition. All those things, they can be transferred and projected onto a different art style, honestly. Because if someone tells you like, hey, this style is going to be less saturated, the shapes are going to be like slightly more squarish compared to what you did before, all those kind of things, right? And then if you do like a test, and I don't think that's going to be too difficult if you focus more on the fundamentals rather than the style, right? It's almost that style, it is really important, but also it is more like the specific rule set that you follow as an artist working within a company, right? So it is highly unlikely. For example, I mean, my first job, I worked on like a semi-stylized game, right? When all the work that I did was like sort of more realistic. And now I work, I mean, yeah, I've worked on Far Cry after that, you know? And then I basically went from Planet Coaster to Jurassic World to then Far Cry, and now I work on Fable, right? There's not too much overlap there style-wise. The consistent thing, well, I try to be semi-consistent with it, that I was always interested in the storytelling and the world building and all that kind of stuff, right? Like focus on the bigger picture. I'm really good at that. If you give me a prop, probably just hand it to someone else. I want to build worlds. I don't want to build props, right? So my recommendation there would be to focus more on the individual skills rather than the style that is going to come on top of those skills, if that makes sense. So yeah, focus more on the art fundamentals and try to get better at those. Lydia is saying, isn't it only risky when the art style is super niche or very specific? Yeah, it sort of comes down to what we discussed before, right? I think the more niche, the more riskier it gets, right? If you were to focus on an art style. But in general, like most of it is still transferable. Magma is saying, look at Naughty Dog. People might have been making The Last of Us style stuff, but their next game is sci-fi/space. I think that's a great example, right? I think the through line is not making a modern post-apocalyptic game. That is not what the style is like, right? The style of their games is that they are grounded, set in sort of a realistic tone, and then you kind of have like those levers that you can pull on top of it, right? Where Intergalactic feels like it's going a little bit more saturated in their color scheme rather than The Last of Us, right? Which might also be just like a counter. It might also be like a deliberate movement from the team to be like, hey, look, we've always worked on like really dreary, like, I don't know, very, very cold, dead looking stuff, I guess. But I mean, saying that, there's also beautiful, like saturated, like very, very, very deliberately color contrasted scenes in The Last of Us 2, right? But that's basically what I would focus on more, is you focus on the techniques that are used, the underlying skill sets, and those things are always going to be transferable. An art style, as a team, they have to switch their art style up now as well, right? But it's just a rule set. But then if it's only risky for very niche art styles, does the advice make sense then? Because that would mean you can just jump between general art styles. Well, yeah, to a certain degree, like that's what I mean, right? Like I don't. That's why I don't really agree with the advice that. That's why I don't really agree with the advice that you should focus on a specific art style if you want to work for a specific company. It is more like what are the individual components that make up that art style and the work for that company. Like for example, if you look at machine games, well, that's not even true. I was gonna say if you look at machine games, a lot of their work has been traditionally hard surface stuff, right? But then you have something like Indiana Jones coming up now, right? So even that switches up too. What is even considered a niche art style? Is Wayfinder niche? Is Overwatch niche? Those are like unique, but I don't know if they're niche. No, I think if you look at any big game, I don't think you would call their art style niche. Like, if we're talking about niche art styles, like Return of the Obra Dinn, like that is a niche art style. You know, it's those kind of games. For example, um, the traditional hand painted World of Warcraft style, like that kind of style, right? That is also niche because not a lot of other companies are doing it, right? Because it is fucking time intensive, you know, like traditional hand painted stuff where at a certain point they were like painting in like directional like lighting information, all that kind of stuff too, right? It has definitely changed since then, but yeah, the Midnight Walk is also niche, but that's because they sculpted the models in real life and scanned it in. The Midnight Walk. No, I'm thinking about South of Midnight. Let me see. Midnight Walk. Oh, yeah, I saw something from that today. Yeah. And that's what I mean, right? Like if we look at so let me share the screen here, right? So if we were to look at something like this, the Midnight Walk. Let's say if this is like your dream studio, right? You lie awake at night and you have like fever dreams of not being able to work on this thing ever, right? How would you then apply to a studio like this? I think it is by showcasing for something like this, you have to go niche, and that is very risky, right? I think you can get close with like doing some experimental stuff and then still playing it safe with, let's say, your more triple A focused things, right? Okay, let's make this more concrete. So let's say your art station is filled with like general triple A oriented things, right? But if this is really, really what you want to work on, you will need to showcase on your portfolio that is your passion, that you really want to work for them, right? And that means that you sort of try to replicate the way that they do things, right? So let's say McFall is saying they have a clay sculpture artist, if they can remember correctly. Experiment with that art style, right? But what I wouldn't do, because that becomes too risky, is I wouldn't put my entire portfolio based on that style. Because then you're putting all your eggs in one basket, and that feels like really, really risky for me. Because, I mean, we've seen this, unfortunately, quite often lately. If this game doesn't do well and the company goes under, then you spend like the last year, 2 years of your life working, trying to get into a company that no longer exists anymore, right? And I think that's too niche. Sure, there is the opposite side of the spectrum as well, where if you put in the work and you learn like a bunch of really interesting techniques, those are going to be transferable to other companies as well, right? But it still feels risky to me. Scorn. Yeah, Scorn is interesting, right? Because Scorn is relatively traditional in the way that they probably build all their stuff. It is just like the shape language of the things that they make in that game is weird, right? Weird, unsettling, H.R. Geiger inspired. That's just a style, right? But like in terms of executing on that style, it's not going to be that different from let's say Warframe, Digital Extremes, or even more traditional games, right? You're still just going to do like sculpting, and you just make like, I don't know, weird looking sculpts instead of like normal looking ones. It's interesting, right? Like with something like this, you will have to really think about like how you build, especially if you're working on like the character work by the looks of it. You will have to really reconsider like how you make the workflow or like how you use that workflow, right? So yeah, it is difficult. That's why oftentimes the safest option, the best option if you want to get into AAA is just focus on the stuff that is out there and is dominant, right? And that is like pretty much standardized. But if you want to go for like an indie company, especially a more niche one like this, then you'll have to sort of cater your style more towards it, right? If that is really your life's goal. Hello, baby. Hello. Sorry, Nacho just woke up. He's been sleeping under my desk the entire time. What? You want to go inside? Hmm? Oh, are you still sleepy? This looks so weird. It feels like I'm just feeding a ghost. Alright. My dream company is to work for Mobius Digital. Mobius, like the famous French painter? Was that it? Was that the painter or am I mixing things up? Nacho mentioned, let's go. It's kind of off topic, but what are those pictures you have on the wall? That's a good question. Let me show you. Because there's a lot of them. So these are all the team challenges that we do. There's actually going to be one in a week. We are opening signups for the next one. But these are, each an individual frame here is a team of 5 artists that have made an environment together in 5 weeks. So yeah, we've been doing this for a couple of years. All right. Nacho has left the building. The chair that I'm sitting on, that's a Herman Miller. A Herman Miller office chair. Da-da-da. Oh, so Mobius Digital is the Outer Wilds people. Yeah, interesting. God, if you want to work for them though, like how many people work there? I have actually no clue how many people work for this company. Let's oh, I can't see the actual amount of people that work there. Azro3D, first time in the stream. Love to see what you're doing here. Hey, thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. What is that? So let's say like there's 11 people on LinkedIn. Yeah, that is going to be very interesting. If that is your dream company to work for, right? That is tough competition, right? But also, don't let that ruin your dreams, you know? Don't let that ruin your dreams. You always need to go for it. Let's see, some other questions. Damn, that's cute. Yeah, I love it. I'm proud of like what all the teams are doing. And like you see this gap here? We're probably gonna fill that up in the next 2. It's gonna be cool. Cool. Well, let's go to the next portfolio review and then talk about a little bit of Crimson Desert, right? Because people are interested in like how they optimize like all the stuff that they're doing, and I want to talk about that a little bit as well. Right. Last question. Darpan is asking, I never understood how team challenges work. Do we have to make our own team, or are the teams selected by the organizers? Can anyone join a team challenge, regardless of experience? No. So in short, we are opening the applications in a week, right? Then we have 4 days to sign up, so people can sign up over the span of like 4 days. Then we do a selection process, right? So we select people, and then we basically build teams. So we build teams of like 5 people, and we put them together based on time zone, skill level, and all that kind of stuff, right? So that we can make balanced teams. And then we put you together, and then off to the races you go. Make your own environment. We are doing a mentor per team as well. So I'm reaching out to like a bunch of colleagues and friends and all that kind of stuff, so that we can have like a bunch of people mentoring each and every one. But yeah. So that's the idea. But you can apply regardless of experience, but we will be deciding who will join in the end. Granny saying, I just looked up the Herman Miller chair, and that stuff costs like 1.5 to 2K long. Yes. And it's worth it. If you spend like 12 to 16 hours a day in your chair, you want something like that. Trust me. Invest in your back, you know. In some places it does, a lot of displacement mapping on surfaces in Crimson Desert. Yeah, Crimson Desert is really interesting. We'll dive into it a little bit. Let's have a look at Patrick though. So currently working a part-time in a small studio on a different most non-game projects. Would like to build my own game sometime. Looking for advice to get better as an artist. Okay, so if you want to build your own game sometime, that is a long journey, right? It depends on the scale of the game that you want to make, of course. But you will need so many different skills that is going to be a long journey to build up. But yeah, keep that ambition, right? But I would definitely say, like, if that is the thing that you want to do, you can basically follow along the same path that I've been taking, right? I'm doing it in a weird way, but if you want to make your own game, learning about 3D environment and learning about production pipelines by working in different companies is actually a really good way to get to know the industry. What my recommendation would be, and this is where I went wrong a little bit, is I focused so much on environment art, right? Because I love doing environment art, that I never really made opportunities, or I never really took part in opportunities that I had at companies, right? Because let's think about this from like a futuristic perspective, right? As in, like, you want to build up your own game studio. You want to build contacts not only with fellow environment artists, but also with other disciplines within other teams, right? That's the thing that I didn't do. So make use of that. But don't underestimate the time and the money and the business side and all that kind of stuff that goes into creating your own game as well, because that is the oftentimes boring and mental part, like trying to make it work, right? But anyway, let's have a look. So currently you are a 3D environment artist, passionate, and graduated in creating high quality game assets and building real-time immersive 3D worlds. Always excited to learn new techniques and pushing the boundaries of digital art creation. Cool. Nice. I feel like I am too biased to comment on the layout of the thumbnails, because I think that's exactly what I do as well. So yeah, let's see. Yeah. So I tend to do the same thing, You know? Interesting. Very familiar. Cool, but overall, I like the thumbnails, right? Like very catchy. This one looks really, really cool. I like the way that looks. They are really contrasty though, so it's very hard to get like a clear read of what they are supposed to be, right? So for example, the underwater cave, I don't realize at this point that this is like really underwater or not, because there's too much going on in this small thumbnail to make it recognizable, right? So maybe having a closer up view of like the trident and then also the diver coming in from the hole or something like that, making a specific render for the thumbnail would be interesting. But yeah, let's have a look. Craney is asking, do you think it's a good idea to create a short film as a portfolio? If we're talking about environment art portfolios, which is what I specialize in, no. Definitely not. It doesn't, like short films don't really apply to like game environment art stuff, right? Let's see. The Fallen King. This is last year. Okay. Relatively recent. Blender Unreal Engine Kit Bash. Okay. So this is not something you made yourself. This is my straight up assumption that this is just like kit bash together from like pre-existing things, which doesn't really hold too much value, right? Because I'm not really sure what this is supposed to be saying. Maybe composition wise, it could be cool. Maybe story wise, but I don't really have the time to really know what's going on. It's too flashy. It's too intense. And I don't really get a good grip of the overarching story, what's happening here, right? A person who died, a person who died on a bridge, and then a catapult, right? So I can see that you're trying to do something really interesting when it comes to, you know, like maybe a siege that has not worked out, but I don't really see what we're sieging, or yeah, I'm not really sure on the story here, right? So yeah, a little bit confused about this one already, right? Okay, cool. 4 seconds. Okay. For something like this, I would definitely go into like GIF format or something that immediately is just, it just snaps you into the video, right? That's what I would do. Because if you ask me to click and then buffer and wait and all that kind of stuff for a 4-second video, I can guarantee you that not a lot of people are going to be doing that. Oh, that's a shame. What is this? Unreal Engine, okay. Marmoset. Marmoset. Baking, I'm assuming? And then sculpting a ZBrush. Slow down the camera. Yeah. Very disorienting, like the previous one, right? This one is interesting, Patrick. So you are showcasing me something that looks really nice. But what did you do? What did you do in this environment? Because all I'm seeing is just pretty picture, and I don't really know what you did in this image, right? There's nothing for me to like actually judge you on and just be like, hey, look, used cool techniques, knows how to create decals, knows how to create their own trim sheets, knows how to like sculpt really interesting bricks, all that kind of stuff, right? I don't really get a sense of what you've done here, which game art is, right? Especially if you want to get in, you need to showcase like, hey, I made this awesome thing. Here's how I did it, you know? And now you're doing, hey, here's this awesome thing. And that's it, you know? There's no follow-up. There's no juicy stuff for me to dive into and to be like, oh my God, yeah. Okay, he used this workflow, he used like this thing here. Like, give me the juicy stuff, right? Show me the breakdowns. Show me how you approach things. Show me why and what you add as an artist, right? Interesting. Oh. Okay. Okay, sorry. I just had to skip through some of them because if your entire portfolio was going to be like that, that's a bit worrying, you know? But we'll get there. Feedback, mega scans were used for the statue and the skulls. Okay. But again, show me how you made stuff, right? Because I can tell that you've put in a lot of time if you've made all this yourself. You've put in a lot of time, you've put in a lot of work. Showcase that to us, right? Because right now, I just cannot hire you based on something like this because I require so much more information than I'm getting right now. And I can see that you've done a good amount of work on it. But I don't know the scale or the intent of it, right? Okay, let's see. And this is where we go into like a little bit of breakdown territory, which is good. Okay, so this is already like way better, right? Is that your reference? Did you like interesting? You just cut it out and like added it on top of it? I'm actually not against wanting to keep everything consistent, right? I'm actually not against this. I prefer interesting. Interesting. Oh, so how am I supposed to read that? Inst G. Okay, I'll just keep it at that. Inst G is asking a good question actually. Would you say breakdowns are good for all levels, like entry levels versus senior or veteran artists? That's a very good question. So the reason why there is a difference there between, for example, my work and a junior artist is trust. If you work in a couple of companies and you work on like a couple of like known games and you showcase like what you've done on those games, right? If you go to like my ArtStation, for example, like all the stuff that I did in Far Cry 6, right? Like I've built these locations, I've worked with level design and all that kind of stuff. This doesn't have breakdowns, right? But I don't need to. Because at a certain point, this is like, oh, you've worked with a big company, you've worked for multiple big companies. I know that I can trust you, right? Where I would still benefit is from showcasing like how I've kept up with trends, right? So that's why I still do personal work. That's why this thing is my banner image because that's an environment that I've been working on for a while, on and off. But in terms of like dependability for a production pipeline, I check all the boxes, right? Whereas if we go back to a junior portfolio, you don't have that experience yet, right? So you need to basically try to win the trust of a future company who's going to give you that opportunity to do so. That's why there's always a difference between entry versus more experienced people. Right, so you made this really cool abandoned radio. Again, I like the way that you're trying to integrate the reference. How would I present this? Because the only issue that I have with this right now is that it feels like that is supposed to be your prop where it's not, right? It's supposed to be a reference. So I would try to make it a little bit more clear, the distinction between your work and then the reference. Maybe that means putting these two not side by side, but maybe you put them at the bottom or something like that. But yeah, this overall is going into the right direction, right? I like that you are highlighting some of the materials. I am still wondering. Oh no, I guess you kind of have it here. It just doesn't read too well. Okay, so this is good. I would make the information clearer, right? instead of having it like cut down like this, which I've definitely done in the past, that is just not a way, like a good way to convey the information, right? I think a better way to convey this information is to potentially have a GIF, spend 1 or 2 seconds on each frame, and then go from base color, roughness, metallic, AO, normals, then wireframe, and so forth, and keep the textures next to it or something like that. And we flip through the whole stuff. I think that's a better way to convey it, right? Because I think the information that you're trying to convey here is good. Like the actual information here is good. It's just the way that it's presented can be improved, right? Still, I'm curious to see, because you showcase the radio, but there's so much more that you did. I feel like you are underselling yourself. Like, you've made so much cool work here. I want to show me the breakdown of like some of the decals, some of the other stuff you made. Yeah, really go ham. Like, nerd out about this stuff, right? Like, really, really nerd out about this. Because it feels like you're really underselling yourself by only focusing on this like little radio when you've made like so much other cool stuff. Yeah, so many opportunities on the table here. Interesting. And then you've got a sci-fi trim sheet. Which is okay. The reason why I say it's okay is because I know that you're trying to showcase skills, right? But try to always have them related to the context that they're going to be used in the games industry, right? So if you make a sci-fi trim sheet, use it on a sci-fi corridor where you have like the trim sheet used and you use like all the different elements, and that showcases that you can not only make a trim sheet but also implement it into the engine, right? Because right now this looks like, well, it looks very busy, right? It looks very busy. So I think once you were to implement this on an environment yourself, you're going to notice that you need to tone it down in a lot of spaces. And that is the benefit of having things built with context in mind, right? Going back and forth between the eventual end result and a trim sheet. That is going to help you see what is wrong or can be improved with the work. Ashish is saying, I had the same problem. I have to force myself to create breakdowns. Yeah, because you can make cool shit, right? Like, and Patrick's stuff is actually looking like really, really cool. Like, if you look at like all the projects, like they all have like ambition. They all look like really nice. But the thing is, like, you don't only get hired to make like pretty pictures. You need to work in the development pipeline as well. So showcasing and proving to me that you can also do the technical work behind the scenes, and you know how to work towards the textile density. You know where to use a trim sheet compared to a tileable texture. You know how to use like a modular kit. Like, all those things are so important. Showcase them to us. That's cool. Composition of this one is really nice. And the way that you use the fish, really cool. This is awesome. And then again, come on, give me more. Give me more. Like, how? Oh, there's so much wasted opportunity here, right? The good thing about this is, let's stay positive. This is relatively easy to fix, right? If you still have access to the files and you've not lost them, this is super easy to fix. You spend like 1 or 2 weeks going through all your projects, making really cool breakdowns, and I can guarantee you, like, the value of your portfolio is gonna double, if not triple, already by doing that, right? Maybe, I don't know, what was the timeline on these? Like 2 years ago? 2 years ago? Maybe not on these older projects, right? But if you just do the breakdowns on something like this, for example, this is gonna drastically increase your chances. So what do I wanna see? I want to see a clearer breakdown of what's happening here, right? Again, the content is good. It's just the presentation of it that can be improved a little bit, right? So zoom a little bit out, put it on to like a relatively bland background, then show me the wireframe, flip through all the individual texture maps, all that kind of stuff, right? Like really take your time with that. Same thing for some of these things. How did you go about texturing them? How are they optimized? Did you create like a texture atlas and are they all packed into one thing? Or did you do something different, right? Like all like individually optimized? How did you create a shader, right? Like did you do some cool stuff when it comes to, because I can see some of the shader here, which probably has like some fuzzy shading or some of that stuff going on, right? Because it reads really nicely. But I want to know how you built this stuff, right? Showcase the interesting things that you've done on your portfolio and yeah, really nerd out about them. Really nerd out. Because I want to see this shit, you know? I want to see this shit. I do have to say I like the way that you've ended on the last image. I do like a broader circle. And this is tiny, tiny feedback, right? But like if this circle feels a little bit too man-made, I would like open it up just a little bit. Feels more natural, but that's like a tiny bit. But this is a cool scene. It's a really cool scene. I would, it's just like a little bit more, yeah, just like a little bit more focus on the breakdowns, right? Show me how you did stuff. There's a lot of opportunity on the table here. But this is cool. I like it. And then potentially we could talk about, you know, like if we're doing some of these renders where, again, think about composition, right? Like I know that you have like these lights going over the scene, which are really, really nice. I would just like try to focus them more onto the focal point so that we can see the thing that you want us to focus on, right? Tiny thing, but that can help. Um, yeah, really cool stuff. Really cool stuff. It's just a shame that it's not broken down and you're not nerding out about the things that we want you to nerd out on, you know? Yeah. Right. Okay. This is a really interesting portfolio because I think you have good artistic insights, right? So let's get that out of the way first. I think your artistry is actually going into like a really nice direction. Let me give you a 7 for that because if you just look at the composition, the lighting, the way that you laid out the materials is clearly focused, like it has a story, like all the major components are there, right? It's looking really, really, really nice. Um, and even in some of these pieces, right? Like this is a really ambitious scene where you still have an interesting story that's being told, you know, with the radio as a focal point. Maybe here I'm kind of missing like a more dedicated like focal point, right? It feels like the radio should maybe be the focus, but it's not yet. That can use some tweaking. Um, but yeah, I think just the techniques, right? That costs you so much points. It's actually kind of crazy because I think in a large kind of grand scheme of things, right? Artistically, you know what you're doing. Presentation is good. You think about the extra details to the thumbnail. Sure, is there things that can be improved with like a little bit of post processing here and there? For sure, right? That can be done better. And I would still love to see. Um, I would still love to see something like this redone, but purely with story in mind, right? So that you can showcase that you can make like a story that could fit into a game, right? Um, but yeah, artistic wise, you're doing really well. You know, like presentation and all that kind of stuff is looking really nice. The presentation is probably going to suffer you some points because there is old work in there, and it's interesting. Yeah, God, it's interesting. Yeah, I'm curious. You do go from like color box to like finished assets like almost immediately. So I am. Well, you do say mega scans were used for the statue and the skull, so I'm assuming that you had the architecture lying around. I don't know. It's hard to tell, right? And if you keep me guessing, then that just decreases your chances of getting hired, right? Because basically, the way that you have to imagine things is that a recruiter or a studio is going to land on your portfolio. And if they're looking for someone, they have a bunch of questions in mind, right? And the more questions that you can answer to them visually already, the higher the chances of them reaching out to you, right? But if you don't even put forward like, hey, here's how I did stuff, like they're gonna just walk away with like a bunch of unanswered questions, and you're gonna lose your ability to get that job, right? Which is insane. Yeah, technique is costing you a lot of points, and that's really dragging down your hireability as well, unfortunately. Which is a shame, because your presentation is good, your artistry is really good as well. Yeah, it's just a breakdown. The breakdown and the game art and like using the right workflows and the right techniques and all that kind of stuff, showcasing that. It's all the nerdy shit that I want to see. So yeah, what's it out on the portfolio? It was a good looking portfolio, really. Like, good looking work, especially from an artistic perspective, right? I can tell that you want to tell stories and that you are very visually inclined and that especially in your latest piece, that you know how to use composition, lighting, and all those kind of fundamental things to make a really compelling image, right? I think that's like very well composed. But we need breakdowns. We need to show game art, because that's honestly what we're looking for, right? Yeah. Interesting. I think you can fix a lot of these things with like just a dedicated week or two of work, cleaning up all the presentations, going through all the breakdowns, making sure that all the cool stuff that you've done is documented, visualized, and all that kind of stuff. Do that for your whole portfolio. Cut out some of the old work that is like not relevant, or some of the work that is just like weird and experimental. It's not that I mind these things, but you always have to think in service of a game studio, right? Is this relevant as a game studio? I think the relevancy of this one is actually pretty low, right? Maybe you can do some cinematic stuff, right? But this is not good enough to be like cinematic stuff, right? And maybe it's composition stuff, but then the composition is also not that great, and the camera is like very, I don't know, it's very weird. It needs a lot of improvement, and it doesn't add a lot of value to your ArtStation profile, right? Where some of the other ones have the potential to add a tremendous amount to your portfolio, but they need to show game art, right? Show the context, show the game stuff. Imagine that you were already making an environment for a game. Like, how would that work, right? Like, try to make something as close as you can to games. But yeah. Thank you, Patrick. Again, I can see the potential. There's a lot on the table. With a solid like week or two of work, you can make some really, really cool stuff and increase the value of your portfolio really quickly, which is to your benefit. When it comes to what is next, I would think about, something like the Abandoned Mansion or something that tells a story, right? And go really deep into that. Like try to build a story from the ground up and build something yourself around that. Because you got the ambition, you got the skills. I want to see you channel them more. Right. Thank you to both of you. I forgot to do the thing where I share them again. God dang it. So this is Patrick's portfolio. Give them a like. Give them a follow. I think honestly, like Patrick is going to be like really interesting to follow up on. And then also let me share Yalmar's portfolio as well. So thank you to you both for joining. Right. Let's have a look here. Cool. We are going to be talking about some like open world optimization tricks in just a second, but let me get through some questions first. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat and we can talk about it as we are going to be doing now. So let me get the questions up. Is the underwater effect done with post-processing filter? That's a good question. Let me have a quick look again. I'm assuming so. But I think most of the power of it, actually comes from, if we zoom back into it real quick. I think most of the power actually just comes from this distortion effect that's happening on the water itself, right? Which does a lot of the heavy lifting. And then you have like an atmospheric fog that is kind of going into like the blue the further you go along. And then a strong, like intense light, like mimicking like the ocean surface, right? And then probably like some good post-processing in the mix as well. But I think even here, right, like this effect of it just feeling like it's underwater, mostly comes just from the distortion that's happening on the screen. And you have some like interesting bubbles and all that kind of stuff too, but yeah. It is cool though. A really cool scene. I like it a lot. Yeah. Cool stuff. Right. Some questions. Cool. Thank you for the answer. No, thank you for asking the question, Instager. I also rarely see wireframes, UVs, and texture with professional work on ArtStation. Is that because the studio doesn't want that information out there? I think a studio is always very careful with the perception of their game, right? And I think in my opinion, there's always the thing where if you post your work on ArtStation and you take care and you take part in like an art blast or something like that, right? The studio wants the work to be seen in the best light as possible, right? And if you then add like wireframes and all the technical stuff on top of that, that is boring. Like not a lot of people apart from us nerds really want to see that, right? But that doesn't really add value to like the marketing potential of that game, right? Because if you just show everything in the best light possible, every image technically has the benefit of being seen by like a bunch of people who might want to play the game, right? I think that's where they go into it. Like some studios still do it, right? But I think that's because the individual artist is really driving hard to get that stuff seen and get approval from it. Because the way that it normally works is that whenever you ship a project, right? Like before the project, there's a time where you actually, you wind down your work, especially as an artist, right? As an environment artist, you are usually stopping the production cycle sooner because you have a bunch of dependent disciplines behind you, right? So in our case, that means if I'm done with my environments, I'm not going to be doing a lot of big changes because lighting also needs to come after me and make sure that it looks like really nice, is well lit and all that kind of stuff, right? So we have a bunch of dependencies after us, which usually means that we stop earlier. That means that we have some time to already do portfolio renders and all that kind of stuff in some occasions, right? This differs from company to company. But what happens there is that there's usually like a big approval process where the art director actually looks at all the individual renders that everyone has done and then approves all the individual images and prepares like a template that we can use and all that kind of stuff, right? So there's actually like a pretty hefty approval process that all these images go through. and this is potentially, this is where my assumptions all go in as well. This is easier when it's done in-house because you have a direct line of connection to the art director, right? And it becomes even more difficult if you are working externally, right? So let's say freelancer or like a remote contractor or whatever, like it becomes way more difficult because those chains of approval get longer. Buddy is asking, I know sometimes after the project you can lose access to some stuff, so it's harder to make UV screenshots, etc. Yeah, that's also a thing, right? Like, usually, yeah, it depends on what happens in like the life cycle of the studio, right? Sometimes you get put onto like another project immediately, which means that again you lose access to your stuff. But I think usually it just comes down to getting approval for it. Where like the nerdy cool stuff that we want to see usually just doesn't really add to the general marketing of the game. On average, how much time do you spend on personal work per week? I know that it's slower weeks and more intense on average is great. So I don't spend any time on personal work a week because I'm so busy working on like multiple things for Beyond Extend, which is like the school-based community that I'm running here, which is why I'm doing the stream, right? Like helping other people getting into the industry. But I will say that like on average, my normal working day, and I'm also doing contract work too, right? So I will give you an overview of how much that I work a day. I work 8 hours a day on my contract. And then on average, I will do 4 to 6 hours like after that too, depending. So I work a lot because that's what needs to happen. We have a lot of stuff on our plate. So, and it's only like a really, really small team. So that means that I need to put in a lot of work. But honestly, like if it wasn't Beyond Extend, I would be doing the same amount of hours just on personal work. That's the straight up truth of it. Like I love this shit. I love what I'm doing. Like 100%. So I play like half an hour a game a day. And that is usually before I go to sleep, just to force myself to not think about like work all the time. But apart from that, I'm usually locked in. Like I love this shit. This is my life. But yeah, good question though. I think a lot of people, because it opens up the conversation of like, oh, it is always a difficult one, right? Because you can, in your own way, through very low quantity input, but high quality input, you can still get into the games industry, right? What I mean by that is, let's say you do a different job, which is the truth of it. Like some people have to do that job to keep like food on the table and all that kind of stuff. And then let's say you do like half an hour a day, right? There's a chance that you'll get into the games industry. It's going to take a while. It's going to be really long and arduous. So I prefer to work way more at higher intensity because then all timelines become way quicker, right? Yeah, that's like a big topic. When studios do art drops, do they usually allow the employee to do breakdowns and renders during work? Yes. So let's say for Far Cry, that was the case. Because again, if that's why I brought up the timeline, right? We as environment artists, we actually stopped doing the work earlier than some of the other people in our team. So that meant that we had like a buffer of work and we used that to do portfolio renders. In our case, we were actually already on another project. Well, not all of us, but like some of us were already on another project even before Far Cry 6 shipped. So, yeah, that's sometimes like sometimes you get like a little bit of time, But sometimes you just have to do it like on your own time. I've heard people doing that too. But yeah, usually there is a timeline and there is some like time that's made specifically for those things. So the podcast is asking, I'm making a portfolio piece of a big carriage asset. I want to show all the stuff I learned at Larian during my internship. It's taking longer than I expected. Can I kind of shortcut the low poly? What do you mean with kind of shortcut the low poly? Optimization is a big thing I learned about, and the asset is taking so long. I think honestly it's better to do it properly and make it the showcase of that piece rather than trying to do a shortcut, you know? Because there is the obvious thing where like in a production pipeline, and this might be different from your experience, but in a production pipeline, oftentimes, sure, a good topology is good, but if you're crunched for time, like you can just decimate the asset and get the topology that way, right? As long as you don't destroy like the original mesh. Yeah, depends on what you're working with. But I would especially for you, if you're just coming off like an internship at Larian, I would definitely take extra time and really make like a nice low poly so that you can impress anyone who comes to your door, right? That's the thing. You want to be able to say like, hey, look, I can optimize. This is what I can do. Bam. And have that beautiful carriage there with a beautiful low poly, right? Who is asking, is there any issue if your portfolio contains only newer work, even though we have a few years of experience? For example, if a 3D artist switched from product modeling and is planning to switch to environment art. Plus only needs to show environment art, or have we show old work related works? Wait, so let me break that down. So is there an issue if your portfolio only contains only newer work? No. Oh, I see. So you have a few years of experience, and then only in the last couple of years. Well, let's make this really clear, right? So let's say you have 4 years of experience, and then all your work is from the last year. Is that an issue? No, there's no issue. This is actually pretty normal when it comes to production pipelines, especially in games, right? Let's say if you start working on a game right now at the beginning of production, it will take 5 years on average before stuff might actually show up on your portfolio, right? Unless you do personal work. I would say that in those cases, I think that's actually a great example of a case where you need to do personal work because you don't know what is coming to come your way, right? Especially now with the unfortunate news of so many studios and so many people being let go and all that kind of stuff. You cannot only rely on doing studio work. You need to have your own work on the side as well. But in terms of that, if that work is only newer, I don't care. It just needs to be good. So yeah, if you're coming from a 3D product modeling job and you want to switch to environment art, do you only show environment art, or should we show old work as well? So if we break that down, right? If you were to show your work as a 3D artist working in product modeling, the only relevancy there is the modeling, right? What I would do in this case is I would take your most interesting and most complex assets and I would show them off in a single post, and then everything else is environment art. That's what I would do. Because sure, there is like a little bit of overlap, but there's not too much overlap when it comes to the rendering, because the rendering is usually done in like offline renderers, right? So that's not real time, so we don't really care about that. So yeah, look at the things that are going to be relevant to games and try to show those things off, and then the rest of it will just be environment art. If I'll say in my schedule, 50% mega bonk, 45% hovering around the model, and 5% work. Still play Mega Bonk? Oh my god! You gotta tell me. Are there any like new updates? Do I need to boot up the game again? What am I doing? Clean the low poly it is. With shortcutting the low poly, I meant decimating and then making it clean up a bit. Yeah, it is. It is unfortunate, but I mean, it is worth it. Especially if you just come off an internship, right? And you're trying to prove like, hey, look, this is all the cool shit that I've learned. Look at me now. You need to take the extra steps. Just started again. Hey, yeah, I might pick it up after I'm done with like playing a little bit of Diablo more. Right. Okay. It is time. Should we talk about big open worlds and how we as environment artists can actually do a bit of work and clean them up and make them more performant? Because I think it is time. So let me switch on over. I have a couple of examples here. So I'm gonna go through like a couple of concepts, and we are mainly. But by the way, thank you so much for the suggestion, McVal. It's always good to have like a push to like talk about like some stuff. And I want to use Crimson Desert as the example, right? So most of you, well, I think a lot of you have seen something like this, right? Where it is just a crazy amount of freaking geometry and interest like happening on the screen, right? Especially something like this. Like, how do we do that as environment artists? And I wanted to break down like a couple of techniques that are going to be relevant for us to talk about. So let me actually get some of my notes here. Did some prep. We're gonna go pretty high level because there is a bunch of like nerdy stuff happening under the hood. I'm not a tech artist. I'm not a programmer. But there is, what was it called again? NGG, which is the way that I understood it. It's basically trying to cull out as much data before sending it to the GPU, right? So that is basically looking at like, oh, this is all the stuff we need to render. We're not going to send all of it to the GPU. We're trying to cut out like all the things that are necessary and then send only the necessary stuff to the GPU. So that happens. Again, I'm not a tech guy, so don't ask me about like more details. But that is happening on the software side of things. And there's also something, God, what was it called again? Let me have a quick look. Because all these fancy names. Because you got NGG, and then there was something else as well. Oh yeah, obviously you have like all your DLSS and like all those like frame upsamplers and all that kind of stuff too. Yeah, there was something else. I can't really find it now. There was basically something else that was happening on the tech side. However, I don't want to be talking about like all that like really scary tech stuff. What I wanted to be talking about is LODs. So this is something that I don't really talk about too much. This is something that we don't really showcase on our portfolios either, which could actually be a good thing to do. But LODs are basically this, right? So I have the Unreal Engine content examples open. This is what LODs are. So based on the camera distance, the further you go away, it's going to simplify the geometry, right? We actually have control over how strong that simplification becomes, right? So for example, if you reliably know that your camera is going to be close to like a bunch of detailed stuff, what you can actually do is make your LOD 0, which is your closest model as you get closest to the object. You can actually make that pretty high and then do like a drastic reduction once you get, let's say, to sort of like this area, right? So this is where LOD 1 comes in. You can actually also control the distance, right? So you could say like, hey, look, I want to have like really in-depth, really cool looking, detailed meshes from close by, right? We can then say, okay, from LOD 0, we're gonna add a lot of geometry in it, and then at like 2 meters, we're gonna cut down to LOD 1 already, right? Make a really harsh transition for some assets. Because also, we also have control over different groupings, right? And you'll see this in Unreal Engine 2, where you can assign an LOD group, and that basically is gonna decide like how aggressive it's gonna be loading down and all that kind of stuff, right? But I think that's a core concept that is happening, right? That happens in games. If we look at Nanite, what it's actually doing in Nanite, it is not going to look at the entire mesh in general and then try to optimize it that way. It is actually going to split up a mesh into individual smaller chunks, and it's going to apply the same sort of thinking to it, but then also removing anything that is not immediately visible to your camera, right? So let's imagine that we look at like the backside of this object. You can see that there's a bunch of obscured triangles here. Nanite actually breaks it up in such a way that it's not even going to render those things that are invisible to us right now, which is the big benefit of Nanite, right? Because it's not only going to reduce the entire mesh, but it's also going to get rid of anything that we can't see. Any back faces, any obscure things, it's going to get rid of that too. It's really smart. Again, oversimplified, but that's sort of at a high level how it works, right? So how does that relate to this, right? That is going to be happening on all the static assets, right? Including some of the foliage too. So I don't know if I have like another area open where if we look at some of the foliage, right? This is very traditional foliage pipeline. I don't think there's anything like very special happening here. But there are certain areas where you can even see like the cards, right? And you can see some of the LOD transitions happening here. So for example, if we focus on like this little patch over here, you can see the transition as you get closer to it, and then it like comes into view, right? And you'll see those LOD transitions when it comes to like any object. It depends on how we alter the asset, right? That is actually something that we as artists have to take care of a lot. We have to take care of not only the base asset, but also how that transition works in the engine, right? So let's say you have your base building here, but we also need to take care of like how those reductions work and how those then, how those transitions between the two, between those different LODs work as well. Right, so how does this relate to some of the trees then, right? Because I think that's the thing that impressed most people here. There is something different that happens when it comes to trees. So if you think about your normal LOD transition, like the world, like the mesh that we've seen here, at a certain distance, you know, it's gonna, if we do force LOD and we say 5, so this is the lowest LOD level, right? So this is how that looks. It's gonna differ. Magma is going into the right direction. That is good. So that is exactly what I was going to say, right? Like with trees, the last LOD is actually not going to be reducing the geometry. It's going to turn that into a special LOD, which is a billboard, right? Now, billboards are a very traditional technique where instead of having a full mesh, it is actually going to replace the geometry with a single plane and then have a tree, basically an image of a tree built on top of that. Now, where it gets cool is that it actually samples a different texture as well, because we don't really have that tree as like a separate texture anyway, right? So what happens is something like this, is that we are building imposters. So these are like billboard imposters, like whatever you want to name. Like it's basically a fake mesh that is trying to replicate a 3D mesh, right? They are shadowed very well for billboards. Yes, and that's where it gets interesting, because the trees in here, they are not billboards. They are 3D imposters, right? And this is a really old video, but this is an octahedron LOD. And what that basically does is you can kind of see it, but like all these lines, they are planes, right? And what that does is you basically bake down a tree from like multiple angles. You then project that data onto those different planes, and then depending on your viewing angle, it's going to show you that angle from that mesh that got baked down onto a texture, right? So technically these are not billboards. So they still have some geometry to it, but you can see that it does like a very convincing job of doing that transition really well, right? This is a video from 12 years ago or something like that. I can't even remember. But this is very old stuff, right? But you can see that here, right? So this is basically what it's doing, right? So if we if we look here, oh, actually, there's a tree example in here too. Yeah. So based on the dimensions of the asset, it is then going to show you dynamically, depending on which viewing angle you are at, how that tree is going to be looking, right? So if we look at here and you rotate around, it's going to then showcase you like a different texture that is projected onto a different plane depending on the viewing angle that the data got baked on, right? Some very cool stuff. Now, this still works like a little bit differently. Because the difference here is this is just like a circle with some planes, right? The thing that doesn't work in our example is that if you're falling from the sky, your camera is going to be looking straight down those planes, which is going to ruin the fantasy, right? That is why this technique specifically doesn't really work. We need something that works from all angles, right? That is where this technique comes into play. This octahedron application, because you're basically trying to do a simplified version of a sphere without using a sphere, right? So we just do that by intersecting like a bunch of planes into like cross formations, and we try to make it look full from like every angle. So instead of using a normal X, you would still look at the top of it and it would still look fake, right? So instead of one X, we add another X and we intersect that with the original X. And that's where you get like the octahedron example from, right? Because that gives us the most coverage from like all the different angles that we look at, right? And that's where we get to something like this. And that's also because like a grass cluster, sort of, it depends on which grass cluster you're talking about, right? But the idea is the same, right? So it's just like a bunch of intersecting planes that are intersecting in such a way that it covers the most kind of surface area, right? So if I open Blender, let me do like a quick example of this, right? Come on, Blender boy. Gotta delete all the cubes. So if we now go in here and we say, okay, how do we create this for ourselves? So I'm just going to rotate this at 45 degrees. I'm going to duplicate, rotate this at 90 degrees, duplicate this again, symmetry this. And now you can kind of see that when you have something like this, it kind of becomes like fuller from like every side, right? This is basically the most simple representation of like a sphere that you can sort of build, right? It's trying to cover for like all viewing angles in the least geometry intensive way, right? So this is sort of what they're doing. And then the stem of the tree is basically just like a plain billboard, right? So just like a plane underneath it, and that's how they're doing the trees. But if you then have like all the shadowing information and all the normal map information and all that kind of stuff like still projected on those trees, that's how you get like good looking trees like this. I think the benefit also here is, and I'm actually curious, I have not checked this whatsoever, but my anticipation is that most of the trees are going to be relatively straightforward and relatively straight, right? Because if you think about it, the more complex your tree becomes, the more complex your imposter setup needs to become as well to compensate for the intricacies of the tree, right? So if we then go and look at some of the trees, which I'm curious about, you can kind of see, even in the distance, like most of them are literally just like a trunk, and then a thing on top of it, right? Relatively simple trees in terms of like how do we represent these in the distance, right? So that's like very specifically curated to then be able to like easily optimize them in the future. That would be my assumption, at least. Let me see. Is there like another forest somewhere we can have a look at? Yeah, most of them are like relatively simple, right? It was also mentioned like this is actually a feature that is built into SpeedTree, right? So if you want to create like these LODs, like these very realistic imposters and all that kind of stuff, SpeedTree can do that for you. It actually has a built-in imposter baker by what I can tell. Got like these cypress trees. Let me see. I'm actually scouting around for like some additional folders pieces, right? And even if we look at like the individual trees, right? They look to be like very performant because from a distance even you can see the individual planes kind of like flapping in the wind, you know? So you can actually recognize the individual leaf cards that are just moving. So I think by design they are meant to be like really performant, right? There's Digital Foundry video uploaded yesterday. He talked a bit about this stuff. Yeah, I watched it. I watched it in research for all this stuff. But they definitely focus more on the rendering techniques and all that kind of stuff, right? I think the relevancy here, and I think the most impressive thing, is the shadow distances, right? I think that's the most impressive thing because if you look at something like this, where were we falling from the sky? I think here, right? Shadows render for like a really, really long distance. And so I started looking into this and they use specific setups for specific shadow distances, right? Where your normal directional light is gonna have cascades, right? What that means is again like an optimization technique where let's say you have 4 cascades. It goes from like looking very, very detailed around the player, and then it will like fade out, let's say like at like a couple of meters, and it will fade out again at like 10 meters, and then fade out again to 20 meters, right? And it's just a way to simplify the shadow distance, like over the shadow resolution over distance, right? But they actually use like multiple different as the way that I understood it, again, not a tech guy, but the way that I understood it was that they use multiple different shadow cascade setups depending on what is needed, right? So they're not just using like the one out of the box thing where like, oh, just slap 4 shadow cascades on it and then it's like, but what they're doing is like for those distant shadows, they have specific shadow cascades. So it's like a low resolution shadow cascade at like a distance, at least the way that I understood it. There is one that's crazy how much high res like the far away shadows look. I don't think they are high res. I think that's the benefit, right? Because they are so far into the distance that they are like very simple representations. But those simple representations are enough for those long distances, right? I think that's the beauty about it. One thing that I was going to say, there was one thing about LODs that we haven't talked about. And let's see if we can find a clip specifically for that. Because we talked about the foliage, right? And the foliage is really impressive in this game. But there's actually one big tech hurdle is, okay, we talked about traditional LODs, right? Where at a certain distance, you have your LOD going down and reducing the actual geometry detail, right? Sort of like this. This is your LOD 5 on this object. That's it. There's one other thing that also happens. In a lot of games, what happens is it will actually switch from the texture that you were using to a base color only texture. So what that means is that at a certain distance, let's say this would go from a metallic looking surface to just like a base color that's gray, right? That is another way to optimize some of these things too. There's another technique, which I know as Vista LODs, and you see them here in action, which is like if we render this specific area we want some sort of representation of the textures to be still visible, right? But obviously, having to pull in that specific texture data of like all these things over such a distance, that would not really work, right? That's not performative. So what happens in a lot of open world games is that they have a special Vista LOD, which is an LOD that only renders at like really far distances. And that is basically a combination of grabbing your LOD 0, which is your most detailed in terms of texture and geometry asset, and then you take that and you bake that down in a very simplified way onto your last LOD. So like LOD 5, right? But then instead of calling it like LOD 5, they call it LOD 6, and then they only have it active in special cases, right? That is oftentimes used for things that need to stand out from a distance, but you want them to be reliably detailed, right? Used in a lot of open worlds. Whenever you see like a tower in the distance, like they do a special trick where they do potentially something like this, where they bake down the first LOD onto the last LOD to then get a more interesting representation, right? So hey, McFal, if you're listening, if you want to build a tool, something like this, right? Like where you just allow an artist to just say like, hey, look, I want to press one button, and then it just like does the baking and all that kind of stuff in the background, right? Usually this gets done in like a build machine, right? So you flag it, and then it goes through like a build machine, it gets automated and all that kind of stuff. But hey, it can be interesting. Is this different from hierarchical LODs? To be honest, I don't even know what hierarchical LODs are. I know that this is like a pain point, but I've only worked with internal engines. So whenever it comes to like optimized, like these very specific like LOD, like optimized techniques, I don't get to interact with them at all. And I don't use Unreal Engine enough to actually know. But I will actually be looking at those because I think I'm missing a piece of knowledge there. Melanie saying also LOD popping and object culling in Crimson is huge. You can see when smaller hand placed assets pop out of the thin air and changes by distance. Yeah, you have to, right? You have to be really, really, really aggressive. It sounds like the same idea, but H-lots are auto-generated. Interesting. Okay. I need to look at that then. Thank you for the suggestion, Jamie. Or Jamie. I'll do some reading. But yeah, Mali, you have to, right? Like if you're building an open world game like this, you have to make use of all the techniques and all the things that you can, right? Because, dude, this is crazy. This is running at like, God, I don't want to say it too much. But I think this is running on like 60 FPS, like constantly on like a PS5, right? That's crazy. That's crazy. The amount of stuff that we try to cram into like a relatively small machine that is like pretty much out of date, right? Because we are getting close to end of console generation. Freaking crazy. Also, at least in Unreal Engine 5, we have the Shadow Pass switch node and contact shadows. Yeah. That's used in a lot of games right now as well. Let's see. Cool. So we talked about LODs. We talked about like how to optimize them from like a far distance, right? Like these Vista type LODs. There's maybe one more thing that would actually be interesting to look at. I don't know if we can find it. What could be a good example of this? And this is more a feeling that I have. I don't know if they're actually doing this. But to me, it would make sense that, for example, in bigger grass patches, what they probably do is, for example, in areas like these, right? This little grass patch here. You still want to have those grass patches or like flower patches or something like that representative, right? In some way. But I think what they're doing here is they take what normally is like, I don't know, like this small of an asset on your screen, right? Even this small of an asset. But they then scale it up to something that is something like this. And that becomes your flower patch, right? Because that means that these assets are actually going to be bigger, but we are so far away from them that we actually don't really see the difference anyway. Because if you are going to get close up, these are going to be probably like way more instances of the same sort of piece of foliage compared to what is happening here, right? But it's all there to kind of give you the idea of, hey, there's a lot of stuff going on here, right? And I'm assuming that that is the thing that happens. I'm not too sure though. Cool, let's have a look at my notes because we talked about a lot about like LODs. There's another big thing that I wanted to talk about, and I'm curious what you all think of this. Let's see. We talked about this. We talked about the imposter baker, all that kind of jazz. Now we have this really, really cool section where we go into the city, right? One thing that I noticed immediately is if you look at the edges of your screen, we can actually see how aggressive the displacement gets called out. I'm not sure if it's even going to be visible on the stream. But you can kind of see, and it's partially hidden. I'll see if I can point it out anyway here. It's partially hidden by, oh, it's even cut off on the chat. But if you watch the borders of the screen and you watch like all the tileable surfaces, they aggressively cut them out based on your screen, which is interesting. Yeah, the bugging out, that's an interesting thing because I'm gonna be honest, like at the beginning, I thought that this was mostly parallax occlusion mapping, right? With pixel depth offset. Which is basically, so if people don't know what parallax occlusion mapping is with pixel depth offset, let me see in the examples, because I think there's an example in here. Yeah, so let me open that. So this is basically what parallax occlusion mapping is, right? This is a flat surface, but it will actually try and fake some of that additional detail based on the height map that you give it, right? A height or displacement map. That is what it's going to do. And it can even like simulate like light and all that kind of stuff. It's really, really cool. I love this technique a lot. What pixel depth offset is that this is without it, right? And you can see that we have like this harsh edge. But with pixel depth offset, it will actually try to mimic and use some of those edges to kind of give you like a better read, right? There's just a black hole behind the player. Yeah, which is actually pretty normal, right? Like that's camera frustum culling. Which is basically anything in the camera is visible. Anything outside of the camera is going to be aggressively called out, right? There's obviously going to be some limits, right? Because let's say if you then run underneath a gate or in a forest, you still want to have that forest shadows representative, right? So it's not 100%, but there is some sort of calling there. So yeah, this is really, really cool. I love this technique a lot. Pixel depth offset on parallax occlusion mapping. And you can even fix some of the stretching and some of the weirdness that happens with your reference plane. The issue is, and I think there's some overlap here with the displacement techniques that you're using in this engine, is that you cannot really do effective blending, right? Because if you have something with like a very strong height map, where it shows like a lot of very strong variation, but let's say I want to blend this with a dirt that also has parallax occlusion mapping and pixel depth offset, you need to be very careful with the data that you're feeding it in the height maps, because otherwise one layer might look like it's floating above the other, right? And that's where altering these gets really, really tricky if you want to blend like multiple layers together. That's why like moss on top of stones work, right? Because you can use the underlying displacement map for your stones, because moss itself doesn't really have height, right? But that's why if you look at if you look at the Digital Foundry, 12 days, 24 hours. There was an interesting bit in this video, and I'll share it here because this was pretty interesting to look at. I think it was this little section, right? Because yeah, they mentioned that like there's literally like tessellation and like displacement. There's literally displacement on any surface, right? So yeah, it looks really, really nice. I'm wondering. That's okay. And then this came up, right? Where maybe it's not here. This was really interesting. Like this artifacting happening here. I honestly thought in the beginning that that was parallax occlusion mapping, just like not knowing how to render at like distant, like these angles, right? Because that's one of the drawbacks of parallax occlusion mapping, is that it really can't figure out like how to deal with like your reference plane and like how your camera angle and all that kind of stuff. Like it's really not good at that. But for flat surfaces like this stuff, looks really, really good. But then I started thinking about it more, and this goes into the weeds a little bit. With NGG, which is basically, from what I hear, it is again very simplified, right? I'm not a tech artist, but it seems like it's a way to like look at all the triangles that are rendered on screen and only send the triangles that need to be rendered and send them to the GPU, right? Which obviously doesn't really work with something like parallax occlusion mapping, because parallax occlusion mapping doesn't add geometry, right? So that's where this system of NGG and it's calling out like triangles aggressively actually works really well with something that is more triangle count heavy, right? Which is really interesting. Because my assumption, if we look at some of these areas, is that like the rooftops, I thought that was like all parallax occlusion mapping, and like the floors and the walls and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, looks like it might be displacement, which is interesting because you can still see. And this is interesting, right? So if people ask me about like how to render a roof, you can see it here, right? There's a difference between, you have the core of the roof, which is just a tileable with tessellation on top of it in this case. And then you have the border of the roof, which is all just geometry, right? Like these are all like individual like little panels that are just slapped on top of a tileable, right? You can kind of see that here. His feet seem to be clipping into the floor. Ah, yes. Which is a very common issue, right? Because your collision doesn't update. And this is, I need to look into this. Because your geometry actually updates. You have an increase in geometry, but your collision doesn't change, right? Which is interesting. So anything that's on the surface is actually just going to calculate the base geometry, right? So if I do like a quick paint over here, let's say this is your floor. Let's make it a straight line, please. Sorta. So let's say this is your floor. This is your texture, right? We're looking at it from a side angle. So this is just like a straight piece of floor. What your displacement is going to be doing is if it has like, if your reference plane is 0.5, right? Which is like your height map, the middle value is going to be the middle of this reference plane, right? That means that your bricks are basically going to be doing this, right? Very simplified children's drawing explanation. But that's why his feet are going into the floor, because displacement is not displacing or moving off the collision, right? Yeah. And that's where it gets interesting, right? Because you could then say like, hey, look, wouldn't it make more sense to put the reference plane up here? Because then we're walking on top of the tiles, right? That makes sense. So if we put the reference plane at like 1 instead of 0.5, that makes sense. Let's do that. The issue is that if the surface is anything else, then these tiles, let's say I have like a puddle, you know, it's still using the same technique, but it's not going up, it's going down as well. Now we're floating above the puddle, right? So that's where it becomes interesting. I think that's why 0.5 is still good. And then what we try and do is the height map that we use as an input, we then try our best to balance for all cases, right? So this is like a limitation that we have to deal with. The shadow is different between the two. Yep, 100%. Like between the tiles and the main tile up on the roof, 100%. And that's the thing, right? Like, it's all smoke and mirrors. It's all just like trying to get the most out of the tech that you're using and trying to make it work, right? Within the realm of possibilities. Which brings up another thing. If we're talking about like all this displacement and tessellation, that's why all the buildings look pretty clean. Because it is really, really difficult to blend things in a semi-dynamic way, let's say with vertex paint or something like that. That is why it's really difficult to blend something with another, well, to blend one texture that has displacement with another texture that has displacement, right? This must be heavy? No, apparently not. I mean, they've done a good job of optimizing it too. I think it's running 60 FPS on like a PS5, I think. With a bunch of like ray trace stuff like enabled by default. So that's really impressive, right? This team is doing a really good job of building like an open world that is like really in depth with like very bold, just, yeah, courageous moves. Like, hey, we're just going to drop you from like, I don't know, a plane up above in the air and then you can see the whole world. That's fucking crazy. That's mental. There's not a lot of games that do that. I think it's only Series S that doesn't have ray tracing. Yeah, I think so. Oh god, yeah. Yeah, see, you see like a little bit of texture blending on this wall, right? But it's very muted. Like it's not like it's drastically different, right? And I think the tech that they chose and the way that they're implementing it has the unfortunate side effect of not being able to really blend with a lot of things well, right? Because in my professional opinion as an environment artist, like I am missing like a bunch of like blending here where you can see like streaks and like dirt crawling up the walls and all that kind of stuff, right? But the issue with that is that you can't really do that in a solid dynamic way without fucking up like your displacement that you have, right? Or it has to be very subtle, but then that might not look good. So yeah, it's an interesting balance that you always have to strike. But yeah, and then also talking about some of this stuff, you can still see that in areas like these, right, you still have the individual bricks on top of a wall. So this is like a wall with a tileable with like a piece of grout on top of it, which is a really interesting blend piece actually. And then individual tiles, right? They're hiding the tiling pretty well, damn. Well, here's the thing, right? Like with a game that overwhelms your senses when it comes to geometric detail, to this degree, I think it becomes less about like hiding the tiling because your senses are like pretty overwhelmed. I mean, I'm still sure that they do a good job of it, right? But if you start paying attention, you can probably spot it like pretty hard. But I mean, to their credit, like if you build like really good tileables, right? Like if we look at let's see. If you look at this building, right, and we pay attention to it, like it becomes really easy to spot the tiling, right? Like this tile, this tile, this tile. That is tiling. Sure, but I think the tileable itself actually really works well. I find their use of palm and displacement everywhere a bit excessive, like it's really busy to the eye sometimes. Yeah, I agree. I think I'm on board with that. To my untrained eye, it looks good. Yes, yeah. And that's the thing, right? It kind of goes to what I was gonna say anyway, is that we are building games for gamers, right? So when I give the commentary of like, oh, I want to see more leaks and I want to see more decals and I want to see more like blending between different surfaces and all that kind of stuff. Sure, I think that's valid. But I think the vast majority of gamers are not caring about this because they're playing a game, you know? They're not playing a tech demo. So 100% agreed. To your point, Raffled, their use of displacement everywhere is a bit excessive. Like it's really busy for the eye sometimes. Yeah, and that's the downside of having this technology everywhere, right? It's like, how do you break up, a scene like this where everything is really vying for your attention, right? Oh, I just noticed this actually. This is actually an interesting issue that's happening here, where I'm almost willing to guarantee that this roof here was built before someone updated the height maps of this tileable, which now means that the tiles are actually sinking into the wood slats, which is not supposed to be the case, right? But it was built before someone updated the height map. So now it's sinking into, and it's colliding with the wood panels. But yeah, if you look at a scene like this, like normally the things that we can do is that we massage some of the edges and we make some of the areas like less intense on the eyes, right? But yeah, it's difficult to do that with the tech that they're using in an effective way. Because let's say if you then add decals on top of it, then you are adding them as like a surface on top of the existing height map, right? Because it's really difficult to potentially get rid of the height map. You can lessen the height map, but then you need to replace it with like a different texture, and then you're running into issues with blending between the two. Anyway, going off a cliff a little bit. Was there anything else that I wanted to point out? I think there was one more thing that I wanted to point out. Let me see. No, I think that was it actually. I think this was really interesting to do like a little bit of a deep dive on. I've never really done anything like this. And to be honest, I spent like a couple of hours looking at some documents and some things, like breaking this down, right? So it was really fun. But again, I think, yeah, the game itself looks gorgeous. Yeah. I think what I get is that this game is perfect for me as an artist in a way of they care about the big picture, but they don't care about like the individual house and like all that kind of stuff, right? Like ideally, sure, you want to do that both, right? But with like timeline constraints and how crazy the industry is sometimes, like sometimes you have to pick and choose, you know? And they are so freaking ambitious when it comes to like trying to render this entire world, right? If we go back to this piece, I would rather be able to like showcase something like this where I'm like, oh my god, I can go all over the place. This is fucking nuts. Rather than, hey, this house looks good, right? Or this house is properly blended with the terrain. Yeah. Yes. But yeah, really cool stuff. Yeah. But yeah, thanks for bringing it up, McFal. I had some fun talking about it. Oh, sorry. Magonapai is asking, is this all landscape or some custom floor mesh? That is a good question. I think if I were to make an assumption that Let's actually see if we can find some evidence of this, right? So if we go back just for a little bit, I think what happens is that in a town, it is probably gonna be spline based or maybe custom mesh for like a small part of it. And then the rest of it is just gonna be landscapes. That's what my assumption would be. So if you go back to the entrance of the town, maybe. Because how do we enter the town? Where's the transition? Okay. Interesting. So we go from like a dirt road literally immediately into this little section here. Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like this might still be landscape, this area. And then as you get closer to the center of town, where it becomes like more dedicated roads, that's where you would see splines or custom mesh. But yeah. I don't know, splines would be such a hassle, you know? Because for example, like this little gutter that's running in the middle, it could be a spline, right? It has like an edge to it as well. Let's see. Sorry, I was skipping here a little bit. So yeah, I would assume that all the roads are splines for sure, and then the rest of it is just going to be like landscape. That's what my assumption would be. More diverse blending also might add a problem to generating LODs and imposters with this huge views. Yeah, that's actually a good point, right? Because if you create more textural detail, then you need to condense more textural detail into your laws as well from a distance. So that's a good point. Too clean for me, is that normal for its setting / time? Oh, you're talking about like if we're talking about like the fantasy medieval setting? Yeah, this is way too clean, right? But again, that is a restriction of like the pipeline that you're using and potentially also the timeline a little bit as well. Because there's a bunch of projects that I worked on where I would love to do like way more work on some of the things that I worked on, but there just wasn't enough time. So I think what you need to do in games oftentimes is you have to focus on the most bang for your buck, right? Like the big stuff that is going to make an impression on people, and then all the small stuff where you want to do blending and all that kind of stuff, like is usually of less impact to the average gamer, right? But yeah. Oh yeah, if this was like an actual medieval setting, right? If we're going grimy medieval setting, it will be like way dirtier, for sure. All right, cool. I hope you enjoyed that. Honestly, like if you have any more suggestions of like, hey, can we talk about like this technique? I have no idea what is going on. I think that could be really cool. So if you have any suggestions, any topics that you want me to look at, give me a couple of days to prepare, and then we can talk about it in the next session. I think that was pretty interesting to do. And honestly, I learned a couple of things as well. And sometimes that's like some of the things that I love to do too, like learning together. Lovely stuff. A nice breakdown. Yeah, thanks, McVal. Thank you for the suggestion as well. So if you have anything else, feel free to let me know. Mally is saying, I'm personally missing some more intentional lighting. Changing it a bit can make a huge difference. Yeah. I mean, but that's the difficult thing about like working on an open world game, right? You don't have control over lighting situations. Unless you do something where it's like very directed, and let's say you go into a quest or a cutscene or something like that you kind of force people to wait until a certain time so that you know dependently that they're gonna be going into this quest at a certain time, right? I think, didn't The Witcher do that where you had to wait on a bench or something like that, or wait until the start of a quest? because the quest was supposed to be done at night. Something like that. But yeah, they have some really, really cool lighting in this game, though. I feel like they go very contrasty in terms of the day itself. Like the overcast day feels very, very, almost a little bit blown out. But the opposite happens as well in the night, where it goes like freaking dark. And I do like that as a concept, where at night you do actually have to have a torch with you or something like that. I think that adds like another element to gameplay, which could be really cool. But yeah, I'm curious, but because even with like a day and night cycle, right? Something as simple as changing the curvature of where the sun is gonna go, right? If you think about like a very stereotypical, and we're gonna get like a plain example. Let's say at 12 o'clock, the sun is almost like right above us, right? That is the most boring sort of lighting situation because we don't have any contrast, right? Because nothing really creates shadows, so everything feels super flat. And what actually a lot of open world games do is they keep the curvature of the sun or like any light in the sky like intentionally lower than realistic, because it creates like a more dramatic effect on the world, which is really interesting. You will think of some topics? Yes, Shitty Podcast. Let me know. Send me a DM. That would be all good. Okay. I am going to take my leave. I'm going to have to talk to some people for team challenges, get all that stuff out there as well. So my focus is going to be getting a bunch of announcements done for the team challenge, which again, we are opening the team challenge signups in 7 days. So I'm looking forward to that. So yeah, keep an eye for that, and then we will see you there. Maybe last question about more topics. I would love to see some more about mesh decals that they have in Doom with the IDEA engine and skirts. Hey, okay, yeah, like the mid-poly workflow. There's some interesting stuff about that. I've got some interesting posts already. Okay, thank you for the suggestion. We can have a look at that later. But yeah, thanks everyone. I will see you in the next stream on Wednesday. And then if you are an environment artist, you want to know more, all that good shit, become a part of our community. We'd love to have you. And I would love to help you get into the games industry. So yeah, that sounds good. Go ahead and sign up. And with further ado, I will take my leave. Have a nice evening or day, everyone. Speak to you later. Bye-bye. Scott, I just got here. Bye, Scott.